The scariest thing that ever happened to me came from the person closest to me. My ex-husband and I were both only 19 when we married. When we first met, everything was glorious. I moved in with him and his family because me and mine were having a lot of trouble at the time, and for the first year, all was golden. Then one day, his stepdad went missing. The police found his body almost a week later, murdered. The tragedy tore through the three of them, Nikki, his mother, and sister, with an intensity similar to a massive hurricane. If Nikki's biological father had been present, that might have been one thing, but that piece of human excrement was not just absent, but only made the occasional appearance to steal one of the kids' social security checks from the mail on arrival, and that was usually when he knew no one would be home. When Fiona married Dave, he had become their father, the only father they ever really had. He was their true family. After the homicide, Nikki's whole personality shifted toward darkness. He would rant and rave like a man possessed, and become violent if I didn't do everything he told me to do, no matter what it was. To this day, I have scars from a physical altercation with his sister on being commanded to attack her and having no choice but to do so, for example. The scars make me who I am now, a survivor, but I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone. Being terrified for your life every single day and never knowing if any given moment could lead to your last is exhausting and traumatizing to say the least. One day we got into it so badly that I told him I wanted to divorce. He kicked me out of my own car at my parents' house and tore out of the driveway, spraying gravel everywhere and leaving puffs of dust floating up toward the sky. I was utterly distraught by the entire situation at that point, completely at my wit's end. Yet for some reason I still loved him, still wanted to make things work out, and for us to be together. So when he called and begged for the chance just to talk things over, of course I agreed, and went outside to anxiously await his return to pick me up. I expected him to have calmed down by the time he arrived. At least, that was what his tone had suggested over the phone. But when I got in the car, the whole vibe felt off, chaotic. The tension was almost physically too much to handle. We rode in silence for about 5 minutes before he shot me a quick glare and then returned his attention to the road. His dark eyes drilled right through me, their anger giving off a certain glint like that of coal. "You know you're my wife, right?" he asked in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice. "That means you belong to me." I didn't really know how to respond, so I said nothing. My mind turned 1,000 miles an hour, deciphering what he was telling me, though. His level of possessiveness over me had steadily increased in the past 6 months or so after Dave's death, as if he were terrified of me disappearing along with the glue that had held together his tiny little broken family. My subconscious screamed at me that the whole thing had been a ruse, a trick to lure me back into the car. I looked down at my hands in my lap, wringing them together until my knuckles turned red. "I thought you wanted to fix things," I said. He smirked, and my gut went cold. My worst fears confirmed in that twisted, psychotic expression of his. "What do you think this is?" he replied. "It feels like a trick," I told him. He pursed his lips together, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His shoulders tensed, and his expression grew more malvoyant than ever. "That's because it was a trick," he murmured. "If I can't have you, no one can." Until the moment he said those words aloud, I always thought of that expression as one of those you only ever hear or read in fiction. It never occurred to me that there was a reason that it existed. Someone, or many others most likely, who had heard the phrase and felt the sheer horror that accompanied its implication. In the course of our relationship, I endured punches, kicks, 2 totaled cars, and multiple death threats. A couple of weeks after this incident, I finally managed to get away from him for good. I stayed the night at a friend's house after getting what little things I needed. She lived not far from his grandparents, but I didn't really think anything of it because the neighborhood is one of those upscale, quiet, safe kind of suburbs. We partied most of the night. She went upstairs to sleep around 1 and left me on the couch in the living room watching TV, willing myself to pass out. About an hour later, around 2 a.m., I felt like someone was watching me. I looked over at the sliding doors to my left that led out into the backyard, and there he was. He was standing outside, in the dark, in the rain, watching me and crying with his fists clenched. I felt my eyes grow wide, and I sank slowly down into the leather cushions as if they could make me disappear from sight. I don't know how much longer he was there. When I looked again, he was gone. The next day, my mom came to get me, because he wrecked my car, so I no longer had a ride. He was standing at the corner staring at her as she drove past. We had to get a police escort to take us straight to the station to get a restraining order. I spent the next year getting the divorce straightened out and getting the rest of my belongings that he was trying to hold hostage, like my birth certificate, diploma, and social security card. I spent the next 6 years, even after entering into a wonderful and truly loving relationship, in fear that he would come for me. Even now, 8 years later, sometimes he will still try to contact me through other people or fake accounts on social media. Sometimes the most unsuspecting person is the one you have to worry about. Sometimes all it takes is one tragedy to twist a person completely inside and turn them into a monster on the outside. I will preface this by saying that I think I'm silly to believe in ghosts, and I get embarrassed to speak about it. The alternative to believing that I was haunted is admitting that I am much more mentally ill than I had ever believed, which is absolutely possible. This took place over a few years in a farmhouse in the desert of Arizona. It was newly developed land. We moved into the place when I was 15. At the time, I was going through a lot emotionally and smoking a lot of weed. That might explain some of my personal experiences, so I'll try not to dwell on them too much. The house was set up almost plantation style. It was very wide, had a big wraparound porch, and lots of awkward corners. The front room was a tall library with an open balcony to the upstairs, which ran into long, skinny bedrooms. My parents' room was closest to the stairs and was attached to a nursery with a sliding ensuite door. My brother's rooms, who were 2 years younger than me, and my room were at the end of a dark hallway. That side of the house never got sun, so it had bad vibes all around. Downstairs, there was a messed up Harry Potter-style closet, a sunken-in living room, a kitchen in the center of the house, and a sunken playroom for the baby. It honestly started the first day that we moved in. My brother and I were the only ones in the house, and we were unboxing plates. It was so empty that everything in there echoed. I swear it sounded like a little girl laughed, like a creepy track that you could get off of an app or something. Keep in mind, the TVs were not plugged in. We were on an acre of land, far away from the dirt road, and my brother was way too stupid to pull a prank like that. I started hearing voices at night. This wasn't unusual. I honestly used to freak myself out so badly that I think I made noises up to scare myself. My parents had raised me not to talk about things scaring me, to tough it out and be a big girl. It was fine most of the time during the day. Everything bad came at night. I remember distinctly when it started messing with me in bed. In solidarity, my brother and I kept our bedroom doors open for the hallway's nightlight, and in case we needed to call for each other. We had a pretty messed up childhood that might have contributed to all the codependency I'll describe during this. I was falling asleep, but not quite out. I felt the blanket slipping off the bed and reached down to grab it. This was common. I didn't have a bed frame with a foot. It kept slipping no matter how I tried to tuck it. In classic horror movie fashion, the last time I pulled it, I felt tension. There was nothing it could have been caught on. I felt like the second I went from confused to terrified, it bounced back to me. I don't know how to explain this that well, but I was certain that someone was under the bed pulling it away from me. Later, I moved another nightlight into the bedroom. It was a kind of spooky amber orange, and I convinced my parents to let me paint the walls cherry red. Again, I was almost asleep, but not quite out, so I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis. I heard the carpet rustle, and maybe joints cracking. It sounded like my mom had come in to check on me. I opened my eyes, and immediately froze. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. There was a woman crawling across my floor from the far side of my room to the foot of my bed. She was pale and stringy-haired as if she were going bald. I couldn't see her face. I don't know how I fell asleep. I couldn't scream or move. I think she disappeared under my bed. But again, this could always be a hallucination. My baby brother was about 7 months old when she started coming out during the day. My mom was a teacher at the time and was able to stay home with us during summer vacation. It was lunchtime and we were watching a movie quietly downstairs while the baby napped. There were noises upstairs, as if something had been dropped to the ground. We listened for a second before my mom ran up. She thought the baby had fallen out of his crib. We opened the door and found him sound asleep. There was weird white stuff on the floor. It took us a while to figure out that it was drywall or something like that. There was a crawl space to a small attic where the AC and insulation could be reached. It was barely big enough to get into and a good 9 feet from the ground. It also had to be pushed up and slid over to open. There was a visible gap. The carpet was a really ugly dark blue, so we could see the white spots on the ground as if something had been dragged from one side of the room to where the crib was, and it stopped right in front of it. My mom checked the closet and called my stepdad. He couldn't leave work, so he stayed downstairs until he got home and checked the crawl space. We have never had animals. It's really difficult for most things to live in Arizona, so wildlife is pretty rare in that area. He didn't find anything, or signs of anything living up there. This happened every other day for 2 weeks. We really didn't know what to make of it. My mom thought it might be the AC suctioning the opening upward. It stopped and didn't happen again for 2.5 years, until my baby sister was born and stayed in the same crib. Again, it happened on and off for a few weeks, and never again. To keep my own solo experiences brief, I had a period of 3 months where I straight up did not sleep. I went crazy. Every night, I felt like my bed was shaking. The instant I laid my head down, it would vibrate, the metal frame would sway, and I would feel as if something was pushing the mattress between the baseboards or sitting on the corner. I had my brother touch the frame one night to tell me if the shaking was in my head or not. He said it wasn't, but I'm still not sure if he wasn't just playing into it. I thought I might be having seizures or something. At one point I got so frustrated I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the dog. I started hearing whispers too. Not a noise that sounded odd, but someone calling my name. My name has 3 freaking syllables. I would be in my room, door open, doing something at night after my parents went to bed. It was a female voice, but it sounded off. I don't know how to explain it. The downstairs really scared me after the lights went out, so I never went down, but I did walk to the balcony and look. I never saw anything, but the whispering would stop when I got close. My brother started hearing it too. He's kind of weird. His life's dream has been enlisting in the army, so his reaction was always getting his knife and walking right downstairs to confront it. He would turn the lights on and look around before coming right back up. He slept on my floor a few nights because he was convinced that she wanted me. We had prior haunting experiences, which led to my parents making jokes that the ghosts follow us. They didn't pay much attention to it at the time, when it was quiet. One night, my parents went out with the babies. My brother and I were in our rooms, doors open per usual. We started hearing something strange. At first, I thought it was the wind. It got louder until it was clear that a woman was wailing. I know it sounds crazy, but it was so clear. We hid in my room for what felt like hours, calling my mom. For some reason, it never occurred to us to call the police. Eventually, the crying stopped. We hatched a plan to run for the stairs and out the nearest door. All of the lights were on in the house, and my brother has his stupid knives. It's like it knew that we were going to leave. We heard shuffling outside the door, and maybe breathing? I guess it could have been the air conditioning. We kind of decided that we were ready to die, unlocked the door, and booked it. The crying started again, and it was very clear that it was coming from my parents' room. We stood outside the property line for another hour waiting for them to arrive, watching the house. No one could have gotten out without us seeing. We had huge windows lining the upstairs hallway that showed everything with the lights on. My parents again made fun of us, and still do about that night. A few other incidents include my baby brother talking to the man upstairs. He would stand in front of the balcony and chat up to someone. He told us that the man was hiding in my room. He talked about the man in the window and would ask, "Who's that?" directed to the doors at night. I don't want to talk about all of it, but there were so many instances of voices, doors slamming, and things being knocked over in my room that I really did think I was losing my mind. I moved out at 18 and came back occasionally, usually to babysit. Apparently, my reluctant believer mother and absolute skeptic stepdad watched a coffee pot jump off of the counter. They were also outside sitting and having an open fire while drinking a coffee when they saw a figure in the balcony window of our room. It was a tall man, but my stepdad still needed urging to go upstairs. It appeared a second time, closer to where the nursery door was. My mom said she had horrible dreams about a man in the corner of her room after that. She was present for many of the instances where we heard footsteps upstairs, doors slamming when the AC was off, etc., but she always denied that there was anything wrong. Once my parents left town with the kids for a week. At this point I was 19 and living happily an hour away. My mom begged me to check on my brother and stay a few nights for the weekend. I arrived during the evening after I got off of work. I asked how had things been when he was alone. He said he was fine, he just didn't go upstairs at night and, quote-unquote, minded his business. He said if he ignored it and tried not to get scared, then it, in return, ignored him. He felt safe with the dog. We were watching YouTube and eating when we started to hear a deep noise. At first, I thought it was a bike or one of the small buggies that people drove out here. Then, I noticed that it was holding a tune. It was humming. The dog had a weird thing about staring into the bathroom if the door was open, which is scary at night. This time, the door was closed, and he still stood up and stared. The noise was so deep that it sounded as if it couldn't have been human, but it was definitely melodic. There's nothing I could think to figure out to try and explain it. My brother and I just kind of looked at each other. Then, a door slammed upstairs, and we decided to nope out of there and go for a walk. When we got back, I decided that I would sleep in my parents' room. It didn't feel right to stay in the kids' room, but looking back, it would have been best to stay close to my brother. I fell asleep surprisingly easy. I guess about 2 hours passed before my brother slammed the door open. The house smelled like it was burning. Not really like a fire smell, but more like burning plastic and trash. I was panicked. I was the adult and had no idea what to do in that situation. We checked the house. I turned off the air conditioning, thinking it might be on fire. We opened all the windows and fell asleep on the couches downstairs. The next day, the smell was still lingering, but less overwhelming. The air conditioner was fine when I turned it back on. Like usual, the day was fine. That next night, my brother and I went on a Jack-in-the-Box run. It might have taken 30 minutes. We arrived home to a mess of blood, vomit, and shit. The dog was sick all over the living room. We immediately took him to an emergency vet, certain that he was dying. They checked him for everything that they could and gave him a clean bill. When we got home, all hell broke loose. My brother and I were cleaning up the mess with the doors open for airflow. There were absolutely insane banging noises coming from upstairs. We hadn't locked up on the way out. My brother thought that someone had snuck in and was trashing the place. He went up to check, and I hung out downstairs ready to call the cops if need be. Nothing happened. Nothing even seemed out of place. We kept cleaning, but the noise started almost immediately. It kind of sounded like someone was shouting behind a wall of cement. I couldn't tell the gender. My brother told me he had been fine until I got there, that I could leave if I wanted. I totally did, and I didn't go back. My parents sold the house this year. During the interim of the move, they stayed in an Airbnb. My brother lived really close to his work, so he stayed in the house with the dog for a few weeks. This story is just his own, so I'm not sure if I believe it. Like I said, he's kind of strange, but he's also not really one to embellish. He had been hearing the usual things, even his name being called in the night, but ignored all of it. His friends had been coming over to keep him company. The last day he was supposed to finish moving, he brought another friend. He says he felt that they were being watched the whole time when they cleared the place out, and his friend left him to lock up. They got into the car facing the house when they noticed that the blinds were open. They were definitely closed on the way out. His friend claims that he saw them open from the corner of his eye. My brother says that there is a woman squatting in front of a downstairs window, close to where he had just left from. She was pale, her nose was hooked, and her hair was black and stringy. Again, classic horror movie ghost. He said she had black eyes with visible white dots in the centers. Inside-out eyes, as he called them, and she was smiling. He says it took him a second of shock to realize that she was looking directly at him. He felt sick, like she could walk right out and get him. They burned rubber when his friend snapped out of it, and they screamed at each other all the way down the road about what they saw. He called me right after to explain it, but I was with my own friends and not really willing to listen at the time. What messes me up is that my mom thought he had a psychotic break. He went into his room and cried all night at the Airbnb. She thought something had happened with his girlfriend. My brother is not a crier. I haven't seen him do that since we were little. When we got together and talked about it, his eyes teared up then, too. He said he didn't know why, but he knew that she wanted to kill him. He drew a picture of her. It's not great, but it still fills me with the deepest foreboding. It took me a while to realize that I saw her too, just once in my bedroom almost 5 years ago. Suddenly it made sense. I knew it didn't feel like a woman, but it felt feminine, like something pretending to be a woman. My ex brought this up today. We dated all through high school and had a few experiences together that she recounts as her only paranormal encounters. I would love to still think that this was my own delusion, but it was shared by way too many people. Maybe a few things can be explained, but most of it truly can't. It has affected me so deeply that I'm still terrified that if I think too much about her, she'll follow us a state away. This is my mom and dad's story. It was their honeymoon. They married in August of 1980 in Australia, and they were driving along the Bruce Highway into a city called Rockhampton, Queensland. It was late at night, 8 p.m.-ish, and they had been driving most of the day. There is a very long stretch of road before you come into the city that's just bush, kilometers of it. At night, the bush can be very scary. They had not passed cars for some time, probably a couple of hours. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared a long way behind them in their rearview mirror. That was fine, whatever. They keep driving as normal. Then, the headlights start getting closer and closer. My dad is driving, and says something like, "What a bloody turkey. Look at how fast he's going." The car comes right up to them with their high beams on, and follows them for about 5 minutes like that. Mom and Dad have a conversation about why can't the person just overtake them. Then, the car completely backs off. Like slows right down, almost to a complete stop, and hangs back about 1 to 2 kilometers away for a good 15 minutes. Mom and Dad both think that is super weird and creepy, but again, whatever. They just keep going. Then the car speeds up again, tailgating high beam and sort of swerving into the other lane as if to get to overtake them, but he never did. This goes on for another 5-ish minutes. Mom and Dad are both really scared now. Remember, this is the days before mobiles or cell phones, and besides, there would have been no reception in that area to call for help, even if they had them, and it's not over yet. The car backs off again, but not as far as before, and then hangs back there for about a minute, before hitting the gas and absolutely flying past Mom and Dad and finally passing them. There appeared to be only one person in the car, but they couldn't really see what that person looked like. There was also no number plate on the car to identify it. And I know my dad has told me heaps of times before, but I can't actually remember what sort of car it was now. I feel like it was sort of a sedan type of thing. Definitely white. The car disappears up the road, as if it were never there. Mom and Dad were shaken to their core, but pleased that it was seemingly over. But no, it's still not done yet. The road now becomes a bit more windy, whereas previously it had almost been straight. Mom and Dad come around a corner and the car is parked in the middle of the road, facing them, again with high beams on, both driver and passenger doors wide open, and the man, they could now see that it was a man, standing in front of the car with his arms spread wide. Spread as if to make them stop. Mom was screaming at Dad, "Just hit him, don't stop, just hit him." And my dad, being the bloody hero that he is, did not stop, and drove around the man's car on the right-hand side of it, which would be the passenger side as it was parked facing them. The man tried to get in front of Dad, I assumed to stop him from driving off, as he made this maneuver, but he couldn't quite get there in time. He was very close to the car, and Dad nearly hit him. Dad absolutely floored it. He said he was doing around 130, 140 kilometers per hour to get away from that man. They aren't sure how long they drove like that, but they didn't slow back down to the speed limit until they started to come into the city limits. They made it to their hotel and parked the car at the back of the hotel so that you couldn't see it from the road, because it was on the side of the highway and passing traffic could see the cars parked there. Mom was quite hysterical and told reception what had happened. They called the police and reported it, but they never found the car or the driver. Fast forward to many years later, and Mom was watching the news, and Ivan Milat had just been arrested. Mom screamed and called Dad into the lounge room. They both agreed that he was in fact the man that they saw. They were absolutely adamant. I can't find evidence to suggest that Ivan Milat was active in Queensland during that time, but I certainly won't call Mom and Dad liars because of what they saw. I imagine it was another creepy hillbilly who looked very similar to Mr. Backpacker Murderer. I woke up this morning to some disturbing news. My wife and I sleep in different rooms. Mainly because I snore a lot, and I also toss and turn due to spinal issues. It works out best for us. Lately, I've been going to bed around 4 a.m. since I'm out of a job, and I prefer the quiet of the night. My wife usually gets up anywhere between 5 to 6 a.m. if the cats are bugging her, to give them a little something until feed time. Don't ask me why, it's just what she does. Anyway, this morning after I woke up, she said as she walked past my room, she saw a shadow figure sitting on the corner of my bed, staring at me, and that my iPod was on. She also said she knew I was sleeping because I was snoring. Now, I usually watch something on my iPad before going to sleep, but I also keep my door mostly closed so that the light from the iPad doesn't disturb her. If she saw me, it means the door was open, as it would have been impossible otherwise. Now, that part doesn't disturb me too much. We have 4 cats, and it's not out of the ordinary for them to push the door open. What I know 100% for a fact is that I had the door mostly closed, and the iPad was definitely in sleep mode. I always put my iPad in sleep mode and then put my phone on the charger prior to going to sleep. My door creaks, so I would have heard it open if I were still up. This is disturbing to me because it isn't the first time a shadow man was spotted by my wife, and I spotted one before meeting her. Back in either 2008 or 2009, I was living in my first apartment. I had the scariest experience of my life. I woke up sleeping on my chest, which I never do, and I found my entire body was paralyzed. The only thing I could move was my eyes. Out of the corner of my left eye, I could see a shadow figure approaching me. I tried screaming, but nothing came out. I started to panic, and before I could do anything, everything went blank, and I woke up in the morning. I usually forget most of my dreams, but this event is scared into my brain. The last bit of information I want to share is something that seems odd to me, but I don't really know how to explain it. It's only happened twice in my room over the last 3 years. What I've seen is this strange, tan-colored dust that appears out of nowhere in a small area. The 2 times it happened, it wasn't in the same area, and oddly, the areas around the dust only have the typical normal dust buildup. I've checked the ceiling to see if anything came out from there, and found nothing. It's strange to me because, while I'm not a clean freak, the amount of dust makes it look like it's been building up over months, which, for that, wouldn't be the case. This may have had nothing to do with anything, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I've watched documentaries on sleep paralysis and read some medical reports. I don't know if it is or isn't a medical condition, but what gets me is that people from all over the world with various beliefs have experienced the exact same thing. Always the inability to move one's body, and always a single or multiple shadow figures. Several years ago, I worked at a crisis unit for the acutely mentally ill. It was a 10-bed unit where individuals would come stay as a step down from a psychiatric hospitalization or a diversion to prevent psychiatric hospitalization. I often worked alone on the weekends. One Friday evening, we received an admission, Michael. Background info was provided with the referral indicating a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder and his recent release from prison after serving a sentence for murder. I completed the initial intake meeting with Michael, during which time he said some sexually explicit things to me. I made it clear that this was inappropriate and that confidentiality was limited and that the staff working on the unit as part of his treatment team would be privy to anything said in the interview or subsequent one-on-one sessions. He responded well to the redirection, which we finished the intake and I went about the rest of my shift until about 11 p.m. that night when he approached the office and asked if I was working alone. Luckily, at the time I wasn't alone and I told him my male co-worker was in the adjoining office. After this encounter, I explained the situation to my coworker, who read my shift summary and decided to sit down with Michael and tell him that the way he was acting was not acceptable, and that he could risk being released from the program if it continued. The next morning, I was working alone from 8 to 4 p.m. Around 9 a.m., I went to wake up another client, Jeremy, to administer his medications. The room Jeremy was assigned to was at the end of the hallway, and he was actually slow to get up in the mornings. While I was knocking on Jeremy's door, Michael approached me to tell me that he didn't appreciate that I had shared the things he said to me with my male coworker. I explained to Michael that he knew what he said was inappropriate, and that he knew anything he said to me would be shared with the rest of the treatment team. Michael became more agitated and got in my face, backing me into the corner in front of Jeremy's bedroom door. At this point, Jeremy had woken up and heard what was happening outside of his room. He came out, stood between Michael and myself, and told Michael that he needed to walk away and cool down. Michael went back to his room, and I contacted my supervisor, who told me to document the encounter and continue my shift. Needless to say, I left that job shortly after this incident. I'm thankful for Jeremy, and that he had the presence of mind, while also being a client with a mental illness, to intervene on my behalf. I often wonder what would have happened if Jeremy wouldn't have woken up, or if he would have been in a more severe state of mental illness and would have become more agitated as well. Michael, let's never meet again. So about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and worn, so he decided that he would try and find a new one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one, as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa, so we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one ad that stated a 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to first viewer. There was a picture of it, and it looked to be in perfect shape. Now, the ad had been up for a week, so we thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken it down yet. So my friend contacted the seller, and nearly instantly got a reply saying that they still had the sofa, and that it was available if we wanted to collect it. I was a bit wary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week, and no one had taken it yet? We thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa in person that was maybe hidden in the pictures. It was a weekend, and we had no plans, so we decided that we would go and check it out. My friend contacted the seller back again and organized a time and place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m. as the seller said he was at work until 8 p.m. and would need time to get ready after that. The seller said he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pulled up to the McDonald's car park about 8:50. There were loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in any danger or anything. At about 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away, and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so we described the van. About 5 minutes after he had texted the seller saying what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old with a gray, scruffy beard and greasy hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and what looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them, and dried mud stains all over, along with a pair of black, steel-toed boots, also covered in dried mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit. "You boys here for the sofa?" he said in a gravelly voice. It sounded like he needed to cough, but couldn't get it out. Yeah?" I said to him. "Rob's car is broken down just the road, and his phone battery has died. I was with him and I walked up to get to you guys. He's with the car waiting for AAA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him." Me and my friend both looked at each other, unsure of what to think. "Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?" the guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked right before he replied, "Not too far, but I need to show you where to go." At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. Hello? Yes? Oh, no way, really? We'll be right there, he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, we gotta go. My dad needs us to help him with a flat tire. I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the heck away from this creepy dude. Hey man, we'll just contact you tomorrow about the sofa. The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and we started to drive away. My friend and I looked at each other. That was creepy. I got really bad vibes off that guy, my friend said. Definitely, I replied to him. We decided to drive around to the back of the car park to see if we could find out what the guy was up to. We could see him standing in the same spot where we had left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that, a car pulled up with 3 men in it, and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing, and it was the number of Rob, the guy who was supposedly giving away the sofa. He answered, Hey, can you meet tomorrow, and I can hold on to the sofa for you until then? As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and couldn't talk on the phone right now. At the same time that my friend hung up the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained to my friend that there probably was no car that had broken down and that the creepy guy was trying to lure us somehow so that the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we never heard from them again. We reported the ad, and it was removed the next day. I was raised to understand and live in harmony with the paranormal. There were a lot of spirits and odd happenings surrounding me when I was younger. I've never really liked being alone in the dark, but I don't remember being afraid of anything supernatural until one night. I was about 13, and we had recently moved into my aunt's old house. I immediately disliked the house, and especially my room. They just felt wrong. Still, we set everything up. We put my 4-poster bed against the wall in such a way that my headboard was in a corner, and my footboard sat right against the light switch. So if I laid on my bed and looked down, I saw the light switch, doorway, and top of the footboard. I had a big window to my right, with a street light just outside it. My bedroom door wouldn't close and the hallway light stayed on. Anyway, I started to see shadowy figures during the day and night, but that was pretty normal. I woke up a few nights to tiny footsteps and cackling. I assumed they were goblins being annoying. I always felt watched. The first night something seemed wrong, I woke up hanging halfway off of my bed. I couldn't see any light or figure out how I was even laying. Finally, I found my footboard. I reached out much further than the switch should have been and turned on the bedroom light. As soon as I touched the switch, I could see the street and hallway lights again. About 2 nights later, I woke up just in time to see a dark figure appear over my footboard. It looked like a man's head and shoulders with thick black material draped over it. There were no facial features, and the blackness continued like it had a body, but no arms or anything. When I think back, it reminds me of the Dementors from Harry Potter, but it slithered up over my footboard. I could feel the weight, and I could move, but it seemed like a bad idea. So I closed my eyes. I felt the weight continue up to my chest, pause, and disappear. I opened my eyes, and it was gone. I felt strangely better in the house after that, and I haven't seen it since. It was still one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. I don't know what it was, or who it was looking for. So my boyfriend recently moved to the city and got this room in this student building. To explain, we have 3 different levels, and each level is the same. It has 4 individual doors with individual locks. Each door is a separate room that you can rent. So you share shower, toilet, kitchen, but overall it's kind of like having your own place. More like an apartment than a house. He lives on the 3rd floor, and we recently bought a cabinet for his place. So as we were lifting the cabinet through the front door, the guy also comes into the building with us. We politely let him pass because lifting the thing upstairs is going to take a lot of time. I smile at him and say hello, and then see his face. Legit, then, all my stranger danger alarms start going off. He had this weird smile, like a satisfied, smug kind of grin. He towered over me, and I saw his dirty mustache that barely even was a mustache. That kind of thing 14-year-olds grow. Nothing really is there yet, just here and there are some hairs. Also, his hair looked greasy, and he just looked dirty. I noticed he went to the 2nd floor, lucky for us. Once we get to the stairs, we both agree that he creeped us out, but we try not to judge and just let it go. Like a week or so later, we have a dog over. We go and walk him in the evening, and it was still light outside at this time. As we start to walk back to the building, we spot the creepy guy, and have to pass him because of the way he was walking. It was like he was moving in slow motion, not a care in the world, and again, with that satisfied, smug grin on his face. But that's not what creeped us out. Looking at his face, we realized that there was no way he was sober. He looked so out of this world, very noticeably on drugs. In that moment, the way he walked and the way he looked, I just got really wrong vibes from him. I did not want to be close to him at all, and again my stranger danger alarms were going off. This happened near the city center. My boyfriend and I decide not to walk back with him to the building, so we take another route just to avoid him. And we take our time to make sure that he's in his room before we enter the building. This is the creepiest part. I'll have to give you some background information. 3 weeks before our first encounter with this guy, someone randomly got murdered while he was jogging near the school campus. Stabbed. Died instantly. The suspect had been seen at the time near the campus, and so a drawing of said suspect had been released. But they didn't have him, and didn't really have anything else to work with. Now, just today, my boyfriend and I got back from his work at like 4 in the afternoon when we noticed someone in a suit standing outside. Didn't really think much of it. Later that night, the guy who lives next door catches me as I just got back from the bathroom and asks me if we already have a key to the front door. I say, yeah, we do. Why? He said that the police had to break the door down, so he was in charge of getting everyone new keys. My boyfriend at this time joins us with the person who lives on the other side of us. I ask what happened. Apparently, the guy who killed the person near the campus lived on the 2nd floor. Legit, my hairs start standing up straight when I hear those words. I ask if he could have been seen, or how he looked. He told me he was tall, black hair with a weird mustache, and looks kind of dirty. It was the very same creepy dude. My boyfriend and I are still in utter shock that we lived so close to this murderer, someone who had walked around near the city center and cooked his dinner in the shared kitchen while he took someone's life. Someone that I had smiled to, said hello, and tried to avoid. So creepy murderer living in the same building, let's not meet again. About 10 years ago, I moved into a new home in Indiana with 3 roommates. I won't go into too much detail about where the home is located out of respect for my former roommates, one of which still lives there. I will say that it is located in a very old part of town, a few blocks off of one of the very first main roads that used to be in the town that was settled in 1846, I believe. Anyway, this house was definitely not what comes to mind when you picture a haunted house. It was built sometime in the early 80s or early 90s. It was pretty ordinary looking. 3 bedrooms with a small loft area, tiny bathrooms, and not a whole lot of room for 4 adults to spread out. But when you're a college student in your early 20s and have the opportunity to split rent 4 ways, this seemed perfect. We had all our own tiny little spaces, shared a kitchen and living room, and spent most of our time just bullshitting around the dining room table. The house was owned by an older couple who lived in a city about 20 minutes away. They began renting the home out to help finance their retirement. They were sweet and pretty relaxed on any rules for the home. They told us right off the bat that they were not physically fit enough to do any maintenance or repairs on the house should anything go wrong, so we were told to call them with any issues and they would send over their handyman, or whichever professional was needed. They never came to the house. Not once. We paid rent by money order through the mail. I didn't find this strange at the time. The first weird event occurred about a week after we all moved in. We all worked the night shift at our respective jobs, so the house was empty all night and we arrived home around the same time early in the morning. We dragged ass into the living room to enjoy some sort of fast food breakfast before passing out when we realized that the entire carpet downstairs was soaked. A pipe had burst beneath our dishwasher during the night and flooded the kitchen, dining room, and living room. Our landlords had the floor replaced within a week, and we went on with our lives. Then, about a week later, we were baking cookies in the oven when all of a sudden the cookies burst into flames. The oven was producing so much heat that I was afraid that the whole thing would catch on fire. The landlord sent a repairman who told us that something had caused the internal thermometer in the oven to be so uncalibrated that you could set the oven temp to 300 degrees, but it would be more like 475 in there. Again, we had it fixed and moved on. It wasn't long after that when the unexplainable and unnerving activity began. The ceiling fans in the rooms would turn on randomly and they would spin so hard that they would rattle and shake to the point that it looked like the thing was about to fly off of the ceiling. Every room was equipped with button switches. There are 4 buttons on the wall, 1 for the light and the other 3 for various speeds for the fan. The fan would make a 2-tone chiming noise when you would push the button to turn it on. No one would be able to turn on a fan without pretty much everyone in the house hearing this chime. We were creeped out, but chalked it up to faulty wiring or a power surge. That chime still haunts my dreams. Then came the TV issue. We all pulled together to buy a large flat-screen TV for our living room, brand new, name brand, extra warranty. The TV would turn on by itself constantly. We returned it to the store, exchanging it for a new one, and thought it would be fine. We would be outside or in a different room and hear the chime, go turn the fan off, and realize that the TV had just turned itself on. This happened 5 or 6 times a day. It was unable to be ignored. 2 separate things in 2 different rooms turning on almost simultaneously. The electrician was called. He found no signs of faulty wiring, and I think he thought we were making it up. After months of this, we began to hear the whistling. 3 notes whistled by an unseen force at all times during the day. This would usually happen when you were in a room by yourself. I would get this sick, anxious feeling like I was being watched, and right then, I would hear the whistle. Someone or something wanted our attention, and he got it. 3 of us were totally convinced that our house was haunted. Our other roommate was a skeptic, and also pretty much had to make this living situation work, or he would be sleeping in his car. About a year and a half of living in this house, dealing with constant phenomena, it ramped up again. We would be in the kitchen making dinner, go eat in the living room, and come back to find every cabinet door open. Sometimes the refrigerator and oven doors were open too. This happened probably 3 or 4 times a week, on top of all the other crap. I was over it, but had no idea how to fix it. I went to Borders bookstore and got a few books about ghosts and hauntings and different information about getting rid of the creepies in one's home. I decided to do a smudging, and I could not have been more sorry about that decision. We planned to do all the sage smudging together, and our Catholic roommate also had his priest come in and do a house blessing that same day. Holy oil and water were sprinkled in each room, the smell of white sage burning. We thought it was over. The next morning, I was walking downstairs like I had 1,000,000 times before, when my feet completely flew out from under me and I was airborne. I remember thinking, this isn't possible, right before I smashed into the stairs. I landed on my back, right at the edge of them. Picture Lucy pulling the football away before Charlie Brown can kick it, and his tiny feet are kicking in the air. I was Charlie Brown. I landed not on my butt or side, but squarely on my thoracic spine, the upper area of my spine. How on earth did I defy gravity? I had now tripped. I was barefoot on carpeted stairs, sober, and holding the railing. I didn't feel a push. I felt a sweeping force take my legs out from under me. I broke 4 vertebrae in my back, about parallel with my shoulder blades. I've had injections and nerve damage and back braces and a chronic pain that isn't normal for someone in their 20s. I began to look for a new place to live. I found out that I was pregnant with my son about 2 months later, and decided that the risk was too great to live in that house pregnant, so I packed up that night, told my roommates that I would continue to pay my portion of the rent until our lease was up, and moved back in with my parents. I was only staying with my parents for about a month before finding a new safe place for my baby, my now husband, and I. But I lived constantly on edge thinking, what if it followed me? It didn't. What did follow me are the nightmares where I relive the feeling of terror and dread washing over me, and every so often, I can still hear the whistle. Last night I was turning off all of the lights and getting ready for bed. I just had my flashlight from my phone to do some tidying up in the kitchen. I turn it off and go walk into the bedroom. Across from the kitchen, in the living room, there is a shadow. This was something that was different from the usual, as it clearly caught my attention. It was something that looked like a long shape peering in from the upper right side of the window, as if it was a long neck or just some weird shape, definitely abnormal. I was genuinely afraid, and kept turning the lights on and off to see when I could see it. It was only when it was completely black inside, and the street light and neighbor's porch lights were slightly illuminating the window. I tried to look out, but could only see myself in the blinds, and it really freaked me out. So I left the lamp by the window on, and after debating, I told myself not to wake my partner up because realistically it's nothing, and what could it be? I mean, we're on the 2nd floor. It seemed really close to the window, and it wasn't moving. I'm not one to believe in paranormal activities. In fact, every time I watch scary YouTube videos that claim to be true and have paranormal shadows or movements, I instantly think it's not true and get annoyed. Walking tonight with my partner, I remembered the situation from last night. I saw nothing on the outside that would show through the window and create the shape that I saw. I quickly went inside with him to see what I could see from the inside with all the lights out again. I was expecting to see it there, and that it was something that I just never noticed before. But it was gone. The window looks completely normal, and the lights outside are the same as they always are. I'll never know what it was, and next time I will definitely be waking up my partner if I see it. I work for a nonprofit that helps mentally and physically disabled people live fulfilling lives. J and C are brothers. I work for the same company as C, but at a different house. There are several houses around the city and bordering area. He works at the houses that only house children, 4 of them, I believe. His story begins on a graveyard shift which he was working with one coworker, a middle-aged woman. The house has alarms on the doors and windows which are alarmed during the night to let them know if any kids try to leave when they shouldn't. C was downstairs in the office. His coworker was upstairs cleaning. Suddenly, the alarms in the house went off, every door and window. He sprang up, assuming that the clients were planning some mass breakout, as he would later refer to it. He yelled up to his coworker to head out one door. He went out the other, frantically looking for whoever was outside. He saw one client standing beneath a tree, but apparently not in any hurry. He thought he recognized the client to be someone we'll call B. He said, "B, head back inside," or something to that effect. He continued searching for the other clients, but after running around in a panic, found no one. He gave up and headed inside to reconvene with his coworker. He said he found B, but no one else. She stunned him when she revealed that everyone was inside, never having left, including B. He said she must be mistaken. He was just outside beneath a big tree in the backyard. She had fear on her face when he insisted this. She explained how what he saw was in fact what staff of that house referred to as white dress, a ghostly woman wearing all white that seems to reside on the property and is often seen under that tree. Needless to say, he was surprised and confused, and definitely creeped out, but the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, a client from another home whom C was very close to sadly died. He was sick for a while, and C was present for his final breaths in the hospital. He was wheelchair-bound when he was alive, and later a client at the white dress home needed a wheelchair temporarily while recovering from a slip and fall accident. They brought the wheelchair that used to belong to K. Right away, B began fixating on it. When it was no longer in use, B would take it for his own enjoyment. Staff took note of this, and couldn't explain why he loved it so much. He would take it outside to a small hill, push it down the hill empty, and then return it to the top and do it again, over and over. B is nonverbal, in that he can't speak with spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates using gestures. One useful gesture has him select staff's right or left hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, I could hold out my hand and say, "B, do you want tacos for dinner?" Identify it as my left hand option. Or do you want burgers for dinner? Right hand. And then he would choose. He also had a tic where he would hold his palm up to his face very close and sort of mumble into it. This is actually what C thought he saw when white dress was under the tree. He thought B was there, and that he was doing that. This is important because B would often do this gesture when he played with the wheelchair. Staff got curious and thought that they might be able to determine who B was talking to and playing with in the wheelchair. They posed a sequence of this or that questions with fake names. B, who's in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily? No response. Is it James or Samuel? No response. Is it Stephanie or Teresa? Again, no response. They did this a few times before inserting the real name. Is it Kay or Jen? Right away, he selected the correct hand. Everyone present was shocked. According to C, he was the only real link between Kay and this house. B and Kay didn't know each other, and he didn't believe anyone talked of the previous owner of the wheelchair, so he can't explain how B seemingly knew Kay's name. This story still doesn't end there, however. For reasons unknown to me, C took the wheelchair home for a while. Maybe it was a keepsake. Regardless, he brought it home with him and weird things started happening around his house. C and J, like I said, are brothers. They live in a big house and rent it out with their girlfriends as well as 2 others. One day, everyone was out except for J as well as C's girlfriend. Both of them claimed that the door to C's room slammed much too loudly and hard to be explained by wind, especially since no windows in his bedroom were open. This happened a few times while the wheelchair was there, which is made more interesting when you know that Kay would often get C's attention by slamming doors. Jay said other strange things had happened once the wheelchair arrived too, but I'm not sure what they were and don't want to confabulate the details. I do know that he claimed to once hear someone calling out his name, but no one was home except him. As I said in the opening of this post, both J and C were and still remain skeptics. They agreed that these events are all strange, but ultimately they aren't convinced. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would love for any sort of paranormal subjects in the world to be verified, but I guess I just need to see it myself to believe it. This happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I had this friend who lived next door to me and asked me to accompany him to Dairy Queen to buy a vape from some girl from his school. We'll call him Tyler. After school, I met up with Tyler at our apartment complex since school had just let out for him as well. We walked to Dairy Queen, which was about 1.5 miles, roughly, up the street. This was in the middle of winter, so it was very cold and rainy. The walk took about 30 minutes. We arrived at the Dairy Queen and waited for an hour for this girl who never showed up. She eventually texted Tyler after an hour of telling him she was getting ready and said that she was unable to get a ride, which was total BS, because she apparently lived right by the Dairy Queen. We were annoyed and started our walk back home. We were talking about how we were going to hit the hot tub when we returned. Now, for some understanding, there is a large Walmart that you had to get past to get to the Dairy Queen. Before you get to the Walmart, there's another apartment complex that we also had to pass. A girl named Carly lived there, and was dating our friend named Dre. We stopped at her apartment because Tyler saw her outside taking her trash out and wanted to flirt with her, which is something he would do with every girl that he came across. She was visibly upset, and you could tell that she had been crying. She told Tyler that Dre had dumped her. Now, for a bit of context, Dre was once friends with Tyler, but they had a falling out a few days prior to this story. We all three would hang out at the apartment complex that Tyler and I lived at, and Dre was actually a longtime family friend of mine, too. After a few minutes of Tyler and Carly chatting, we finally left and headed home. As we were about to pass Walmart, there was a big bush on the sidewalk in front of the Walmart. As we were walking, we saw 2 dark figures emerge from behind the bush and look in our direction. Tyler had a lot of enemies, so he was paranoid that there was someone coming after him. I told him not to worry, as it could have been anyone, and it was probably just some random homeless people, as this area was full of random transients. He suggested we cut through the back alley behind Walmart because he was fully convinced it was someone who wanted to jump him. I'll admit, I was a bit nervous myself, as I wasn't sure what kind of enemies that he had, or what they wanted, and I was afraid that they might do something to me since I was with Tyler, which, in hindsight, was probably a bit selfish, but I was a kid. We decided to just continue down the sidewalk we were on, and take our chances agreeing to just book it if they tried anything. The closer we got, the sketchier the whole situation became, because these people just kept peeking around the bushes at us. Once we got to the bush, I was surprised to see Dre and a well-known thug, future murderer, named D, come out from behind it. Dre looked pissed, and D had a weird grin on his face that made me know that they were up to no good. I also noticed that D was holding his cell phone at a weird angle, like he was recording or something. That made me extremely nervous. Dre and D just walked up to us on the sidewalk, with D still awkwardly smirking, and Dre asked where we were coming from. I didn't say anything, as I didn't want to be involved in the beef that Dre and Tyler had with each other. Tyler began to try and explain to Dre that we were coming back from Dairy Queen and that we had run into Dre's girlfriend Carly and that Carly was upset over their breakup. Dre didn't believe him, and accused him of trying to hit on her. He said that they never broke up, and accused Tyler of lying. Tyler attempted to get me involved by looking at me as if he expected me to confirm that Carly in fact had said that they broke up. I froze and just shrugged my shoulders and tried to make it clear that I wanted no part of anything. Dre didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then after an awkward silence, Tyler attempted to part ways and walk up the street after saying goodbye. All of a sudden, Dre shoved Tyler to the ground, and then sucker punched him in his face as he crawled back to his feet. Dee began hysterically laughing in a very menacing way, and I just stood there looking at Dre, waiting for him to come after me next. You see, the night before this, I had gotten into it with Dre over a text and called him a little bitch because he wouldn't forgive Tyler. I know that was immature now. He walked past me without doing anything, and walked up the street in the opposite direction. Now by this point, Tyler was hysteric and started running up the street yelling at me to come on or they would get me, and I was trying to keep up with him. He yelled at me for not helping him. At that moment, Tyler's mom pulled up next to us and we got into her car and she drove us home. He was crying and he told her what had happened. She seemed kind of dismissive about the whole thing and said to just stay away from Dre. I was just happy to be away from the situation. Tyler went straight to his house and didn't talk to me again for a few days. I guess he was still mad at me about not helping him. In my defense, everything happened so fast that I didn't really know what to do. Dre ended up texting me after I got home just saying, "Hey," but I ignored it. The next encounter with Dee was a bit more alarming as he apparently did indeed want to get me next. Tyler and I were just hanging out at the apartments one day when he got a text from one of his friends that Dre and Dee were smoking weed at the supermarket right next door to the apartments. Apparently, Dre told Dee about how I was best friends with Tyler and had been quote-unquote talking smack, to which Dee responded by suggesting that they walk over to my apartments to beat me up. Dre told him no, because we were family friends, so that was the end of that. I didn't see Dee again until high school when he was put into my algebra class. He walked into the classroom with that same creepy smile on his face that he always seemed to have and sat down across from my desk. He turned to me during a quiz and asked me if I remember him, to which I replied the affirmative. He asked me if I remember Dre, and when Dre punched Tyler, and once again, I said yes. This kid went on about how he enjoyed watching Dre do that to Tyler, and he actually had 2 knives in his pocket that day and wanted to use them on Tyler, but Dre wouldn't let him. So fast forward to 2018, I was walking around Sears with my fiancé trying to find baby clothes for our son who was due soon. I hadn't heard anything about Dre or Dee since high school, and I received a text from an old buddy from school telling me that Dee got arrested for allegedly shooting some girl in the back of the head at a party. Apparently, she refused to sell him cocaine, so he shot her in a fit of rage. He fled the scene and was arrested soon after that on attempted murder charges, since the girl survived. She ended up making a full recovery. This wasn't even the first time Dee has shot someone. A year prior, he had shot some kid in the leg during a drug deal gone bad. I'm not sure if Dre is still friends with Dee, but as far as I know, he's not involved in the things he used to be involved with. So to the psycho who plotted to jump me and shot 2 people, let's not meet again. In 2011, my older cousin bought a small 2-bedroom single house in a quiet neighborhood for retired folks. The house was very small, with only 850 square feet of interior space, but it sat on a large plot of land. We could have easily fit 2 more houses like it on that lot, and still would have nice leftover space for yards and gardening. I was still a college student at that time, and I lived with my cousin. When he bought the house, I moved in with him. There were the 2 of us living there. According to the real estate agent, the house had been abandoned for around 3 years. The previous owner basically left it unmaintained and moved to a different state. The house had 1 main floor, a small attic, and an unfinished basement. The first time we walked in, the floorboards were already rotted out. We could see the basement through them. Everything was in horrible condition, and we would have to do major restoration to make it livable again. The property also had a small storage shed in the back of the lot. My cousin got a great offer, so he took the deal without much hesitation. Weird things started to happen when we began our restoration work. One day we were working on the bathroom. My cousin told me that he had to go to Home Depot for some stuff, and so he left. I heard him open the door, go outside, close it, turn on his car, and drive away. I was taking apart the old boards that were nailed on the bathroom walls. My back was facing the bathroom door. 5 minutes after my cousin left, the bathroom door, which was open, started to slowly move to the closed position. I knew this because I could hear the creaky old door sound that it made. I turned around and saw the door continue to close on its own. Then it stopped just as it touched the door frame and bounced back a little. I thought maybe it's just the wind. Then, suddenly the door pulled itself shut tightly, as if there was someone on the other side of the door. It happened right in front of me. I was only 4 feet away. No wind could have done that. Plus, all the windows were closed around the house, so there couldn't possibly be any form of breeze. You might think that maybe the AC caused it, but no. This old house did not have central AC. We had to put in window AC units afterward. At this point, I thought my cousin was messing with me, so I called out to him, but there was no response. Just silence. I opened the door, continued to call for him, telling him to stop playing around. But my cousin was not there. I checked the parking lot, and he was, in fact, gone. I even got outside and did a perimeter check, but no one was there, and I still cannot explain what happened. After the restoration was done, we moved in. My cousin sometimes went on business trips for weeks, and there would just be me in the house. The following happened whenever I was alone. One night I was studying and had my headphones on. I heard sounds of someone walking around in the basement, which was directly below my bedroom. It sounded like they had slippers on, and I could hear the sound of them dragging on the concrete floor with each step. What's weird was that I could not pinpoint exactly which direction in which it was coming from. It's a strange sensation when the sounds were coming from the back of my head, as if they were just right behind me. The only reason that made me think that it's the basement was because the basement was the only area in the house that had concrete and that could have made the concrete slipper dragging sound. So I took out my headphones, and the sounds of the footsteps still went on. The volume of the sounds stayed the same, with or without the headphones. I thought my cousin had come home early, so I called out to him and got no reply. I took the flashlight and went to the basement to check it out. It was dark and quiet. No one else was there. This happened 3 or 4 more times within the first 2 months that I lived in that house. After that, I didn't experience anything unusual anymore. My cousin never felt or saw anything weird, but he seemed interested in my stories. His girlfriend, now wife, who had been to the house every other week or so, also expressed her uneasy feelings during her stays. By 2016, during a thunderstorm, the thunder struck our storage shed in the backyard and burned everything inside it. Luckily, the house was untouched. I came home from work only to find a police officer waiting at the front. He told me what had happened and said that it was an act of God and that our insurance would compensate for the loss. In our Asian culture, people say that when thunder strikes somewhere, often it is to strike down a malevolent force or spirit. We quickly formed the realization that this thunder strike was more than just an accident. I got my own place and moved out a few months after the fire. My cousin bought another house with his wife a year after that. He still owns the creepy house, and it's been left unoccupied since 2017. He plans to tear down the old house and build a larger one to take advantage of the large plot of land. The experiences at this house were the closest I've got to what could be considered paranormal. I recently had an experience that I'm just not sure about. I tried explaining it to my sister, and I can't even begin to put into words everything that happened and how I felt. So recently I went on a bit of a road trip and visited a bunch of places in the Southwest, Utah and Colorado, Arizona, and Southern California. I stopped at a park in Colorado that I hadn't initially planned on going to, but had never been to, a place well known for its Native American history. It was absolutely beautiful. Honestly, it was amazing and humbling to see the history of the people there. It made me realize that there was so much more about American history than the rather Eurocentric view of colonialism that I was taught. Anyways, like I said, it was amazing. Given that this was November and very off-season, half the park was inaccessible and attendance was minimal. There were other people, but overall it was very quiet. I had been viewing some building ruins atop the mesa, one huge multi-room building, and not that far away another large building with a very large kiva in the middle, and on the southern side of the building, number 2, was a solstice carving on the wall. I was walking around the smaller solstice building, as there was a couple walking around the large building, and I enjoyed the quietness of being alone. And when I went to the large building, they went to the solstice building, and then they left and I was going back to the solstice building to get some more pics of the solstice marker. I was now alone. It's hard to describe exactly what I felt and how everything went down, but I'll try. It was a pretty nice day, temperature in the upper mid-50s. I'm from the Midwest, so that's still shorts weather to me. Some light, small clouds, but not many, pleasant breeze, and a few birds chirping away, and more than a few chipmunks all over the place. As I walked around the solstice building, everything just became still. Like the wind stopped, the animals went silent and disappeared. It was just weird. There was a large, darkish cloud that came kind of out of nowhere and just hung there. There was a weird heaviness all over. And then there was this smell like what I thought was just a dead animal. Like that sickly sweet smell of rotting meat. I assumed that there was just a dead deer or rabbit or something nearby that the wind had been blowing the smell away, but the wind was gone and everything was just still and heavy. As I reached the solstice marker wall, I noticed that on top of the wall, mind you, the walls are only 2 foot high or so, there was a piece of pottery. I swear that this pottery had not been there before, and it wasn't there in any of my first set of pictures looking back. It was a large, broken piece, but now that I think back, it was really clean. The blacks and the whites were incredibly clear. I went and picked it up to get a closer look, and it was really beautiful. A kind of stair pattern and then an angled set of lines. It was really pretty, but it felt off, oddly heavy for its size. I wanted to keep it, and I wanted to take it, and just kept staring at it for what felt like, God, it's so hard to describe how I felt, but the time stood still, and all I wanted was this pottery. Even now, thinking about it, I still get this weird, longing for it. As I held it, everything was just silent and heavy, and that smell was just so strong. But suddenly, there was this huge raven out of nowhere. Legit, it was on the wall 5 feet away from me, and it was the largest bird that I had ever seen in the wild. This huge raven just cawed and flapped its wings, and I kind of snapped back to reality. Honestly, it was bigger than a friggin' condor. Its body was easily 3 foot tall, and its wingspan was just massive. I put the pottery piece down on the wall, back where I picked it up from, and just looked at this bird, and the bird just looked back at me, and I turned and walked away. Just like that, the dark clouds blew off, and the wind returned, and there were other birds chirping, and the smell disappeared. Actually, the smell all but vanished when the giant raven appeared. I got about 10 feet away from where I had been standing, just around the corner of the solstice ruins, and I turned around to see the raven, and it was gone. I didn't hear it flap its wings to fly away, and I didn't see anything in the sky, not even a shadow on the ground. It was just gone, and so was the piece of pottery. It was no longer on the wall. I went back to my car and headed back to the visitor center, as besides being totally weirded out over what had happened, it was getting late in the day and I had a fair bit of driving to do to get to my next stop down in Arizona. I had a good 35 minutes drive back to the park entrance to reflect on what had happened and how strange I had felt. Honestly, I felt like I had downed a bunch of Benadryl. I was so foggy until the raven showed up. Even now, I just really can't explain everything that I felt. When I got to the visitor center, I was the only person in the visitor center proper besides the employees, and one guy was just leaving as I entered. In the gift shop, I was getting a mug. I get a mug from each park I visit, and was talking to the park ranger and the cashier, who was an older American Indian woman, about how awesome that the park was, and how I wished that I had learned more about these cultures in school, etc. when I told them about the piece of pottery. I also said something like, "Oh yeah, up at the far view sites, there's a dead animal too. When the wind dies down, you can smell it." And the park ranger and the cashier quickly looked at each other, and then back to me. The cashier asked me if the smell had come before the piece of pottery, and I said yeah, that the wind had stopped and that the animals were all quiet, and I basically told them everything I said above, minus the intense urge to steal the piece of pottery, and they just looked at each other a few times and kept quiet, except when I told them about this huge raven and how it appeared. The cashier let out a gasp. When I finished my story, they had a few questions about the timing of things, how long everything lasted, and in what order everything had happened, and they asked me to describe the pottery and stuff, and all of a sudden the cashier said, "Would you like some tea?" I love tea and was like, "Yeah, actually that sounds wonderful, thank you," and she went and got some. The ranger and I walked back towards the employee break room down the hall past the artifact restoration exhibit, and she asked where I was and what I knew about the area, and I told her about how truly minimal my knowledge was about the native cultures, even those closer to my Midwestern home. When the cashier returned, she handed me a cup of sage tea, and she asked if I was honest about what had happened. I was really confused, and said yeah, and she told me to drink. The tea kind of tasted like a no-salt vegetable stock. I wished then that I had had some honey and lemon. Then they told me about what they think that I had been near. Apparently they hear a few different stories concerning skinwalker activity throughout the year, but none where someone sees the raven, and that's why they're telling me this. The cashier proceeded to tell me a bit about skinwalkers and how sometimes they curse objects to lure unsuspecting people in. She also said that the fact that the raven had appeared and removed whatever enchantments that I felt was very important, that someone greater than us was watching out for me at that moment, because even though skinwalkers can choose many different animal forms, they would never appear as a raven due to the spiritual importance of these birds. She said that if the raven appeared to me, they could share certain information with me that they would never share with anyone. She told me that the sage would help cleanse me of any remnants of the skinwalker's tricks, and suggested that I see a shaman. I had already finished the cup of tea and was getting a little freaked out, but oddly felt more calm after hearing her speak, and I thanked them and left. I tried not to run to my car, but walked very quickly and got out of there. That night, and a night or two later, I had some very vivid dreams, but I can't remember anything of them, which is odd. I usually remember my dreams when I wake up, at least long enough to write them down. But these dreams, even though they woke me up, I couldn't recall them. I don't really know what happened, or if they were just pulling my leg, but once I got home and really started looking into these things, I kind of feel... I don't know. I feel like I'm crazy, because I can't rationalize what happened. Even when writing this, I realize how insane it all sounds, and I still can't even fully describe it. How weird everything got. It's just hard to put it into words. This encounter happened in the summer of 2006, when I was 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips from my friends' houses in New England and the mid-Atlantic states. I also look young for my age, and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves and were planning on drinking and hot tubbing, watching Planet Earth drunk. It had just come out. Maybe run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive listening to good music, and it was a beautiful day. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I have tried to figure out which rest stop this was and can't ID it, but it was a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s, early 40s approached me. He was a stocky guy, definitely tall, I'm 5'1", and had on a plain black tee and jeans, with dark brown hair and a mustache/goatee. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. He had a super intense gaze and immediately creeped me out. He just had a crazy energy about him. I didn't really get vibes from people that often, but this was so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct or focused, and his word choices were strange. It immediately set off all my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed, and if I knew of anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to go play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area, and walked away toward the store. I was blown away that he had asked me to go anywhere with him. It was so random and uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous," and the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was super aggressive and inappropriate, and he even startled a family who was walking out of the store because it was so loud. I didn't turn around, but went inside. He came into the store shortly after, and was staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes texting my friend about this creep. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks, and went out to gas my car up. I was relieved that his car was gone, and started thinking about the rest of my drive, and again getting excited to see my friend. When I pull up the road to get back onto the highway, I hear someone persistently honking his horn, and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over in his direction. He was directly facing the gas station and had been waiting for me. I immediately freaked out and jumped on the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled out onto the highway after me, and I called my friend, extremely scared. I drove so fast, and probably dangerously, and looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't either get into an accident or pulled over, but I didn't know what else to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits, he pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house instead of my going directly there, and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again and continued on my journey, but the last few hours of my drive I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely, and we had a lovely weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years I didn't put much thought into it. A few years ago, in 2014, I was talking with another friend who is big into serial killers, and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting that this was a serial killer I had met, and told her my experience. She was fascinated, and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man that I had met back in 2006. Obviously, it could be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics, 40, tall but stocky, brown hair with a mustache, goatee, and the time and area, all match. In my memory, he was a little bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one I have definitely never forgotten. I was at Fort Sill for basic training. Every night we took turns doing the fire guard. It's basically where 2 soldiers rotate every hour to watch the door and make sure that everyone stays in bed. There were 4 barracks bays. Ours, the female bay, was upstairs and across the hall from a male bay, but we used separate stairwells. So us females and drill sergeants were the only ones using this center stairwell. The drill sergeants would come up to check on us periodically. The doors were heavy and loud. We could clearly hear when they went into the bay across the hall. Every now and then, we would hear footsteps come all the way up the stairs and stop. Neither of the doors would be open, and we'd never hear them go back down. We even heard objects rolling down the stairs. You could hear them hitting every individual step as they went down. It was so scary. After lights out, everyone had to stay in bed. We had to let the fire guard know if we were going to be getting up to go to the bathroom, and no showering was allowed after that time. There were times that we would hear people talking in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and sometimes we would hear the showers going. We would go to look because we would all get in trouble if someone was up making noise, but no one was ever in there. I should also mention that the lights are motion sensed. So we would walk in and the lights would turn on, meaning that a physical person hadn't been walking around in there for at least a few minutes. Our beds were all in rows and lined up. One night we all got woken up by a scream right next to our row of beds. All of us sat up at the same time, freaked out, and looked at each other. We couldn't figure out where it came from. This was in 2019 at Fort Pickett during our annual summer training. We were in the field, which is basically like camping in tents. There was a large, open field where the medical tent was, and then our personal tents were back in the tree line. There were a few nights where people were woken up by something shaking their tents, whispering their names, or vivid nightmares. Some even saw figures standing outside their tents. Some people had dreams that they were woken up only to be in another dream. I was with another sergeant in a 2-person tent far off to the edge of the group. One night, I heard footsteps all around our tent, almost circling it. It was as if a whole platoon was walking past us very slowly. But our medical area was so far away from all of the other training areas, and as far as I knew, no one was out training at 2 a.m. Period. This last one happened at Fort Indian Town Gap. My ex used to tell me while he was sleeping that he saw a man or figure standing next to the bed or in the corners of the room. He often saw a man with a mustache, specifically. I don't know who that could have been, but anyway, fast forward to another annual training and we had some free time one day, so most of us decided to go back and take a nap in the barracks. The girl in the bunk next to me was asleep for about an hour when she woke up and asked me if she had been screaming. I said, "No, you didn't say anything the whole time, you were just asleep." She said that she had just had sleep paralysis and thought that she was awake. In her awake dream, she was in the same barracks with all of us, but we were all staring at her. But the thing that got me, she said that there was a man with a mustache standing next to my bunk. He was bent over and was the only person looking at me instead of her. She's a complete skeptic, and I had never told her about what my ex saw. This happened some time ago. I'm now a 23-year-old female, but I was around 14 or 15 when this occurred in a sizable city in the UK. Even now as a young adult, I am very tiny, standing at 4'9". As a 14-year-old, I was roughly this height, if not a bit smaller. I used to adore going to my local library, and I still do today. but back then I used to go all the time, quite a few times a week, especially during the holidays. My local library had a large amount of computers that were accessible to those holding a membership, including myself, and at that age, we did not have the internet at home, as my mother encouraged us to use the libraries instead. As a kid, I hated it, but now I think it was a really good idea on her part. Anyway, on this particular day, I was on the computer finishing some homework and checking Facebook. It was very quiet, and I had around an hour to go of my online session when an older man sat down to log into the computer next to mine. I took no notice, but out of the corner of my eye, I began to see that he was looking at me. He stood out by a mile, dressed in a white suit with a white hat. No one in my city dressed like that, especially in the middle of summer. One thing to consider. I looked very young, probably younger than my 14 years, but I had developed quite a lot that summer. Outwards more than upwards, unfortunately for me, and my slightly too small t-shirt and jeans were probably what drew him to look at me. Creep. As a friendly kid, I looked over at him and smiled one of those tight-lipped smiles of acknowledgement. I was beginning to get uncomfortable, but I knew if he said or did something, the staff, who knew me very well, would intervene. However, he didn't say anything. He simply kept glancing over in my direction. Eventually, he logged out of his computer and began writing on a notepad. He then ripped off a piece of paper and slipped it to me, now very obviously staring at me. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at the paper. I knew he had written his phone number. He stood up and began walking to the stairs to exit the floor, occasionally turning around to stare a bit longer. Some of the people on the computers opposite me had noticed and were watching me sympathetically. I can't remember exactly how long the exchange took. I've described it fairly quickly, but he could have been staring at me for nearly half an hour. As he disappeared from sight, I grabbed the piece of paper, ripped it up, and threw it in the nearby bin. I felt quite proud of myself. I could deal with creeps. Younger me was a bit big-headed. I never saw him in the library after that. There was a library closer to my house that I frequented more often during that summer, so whether or not he turned up at the city library again to look for me, I don't know. That wasn't the last time I saw him, though. A few months later, I was on the bus, although I can't remember where I was going, and he stepped on. Still in his white suit, white hat, the works. I stiffened and stared out of the window, hoping he wouldn't notice me. He did, and he stared, but he walked past me. When I got off the bus, I kept my eyes fixed on the street, making sure not to look at the bus in case I looked at him. After that, I didn't see him anywhere again. I regret not keeping that piece of paper. In hindsight, I should have. It was definitely his number, although he could have also written his name. He was clearly a predator and should have been reported. I don't know why I didn't, and I don't know why I didn't tell anyone, although I guess that was because nothing bad had happened. I lived in my hometown for another 6 years before going to university in another city. However, university is now ended for me, and I've returned home wary of creeps. I know this wasn't very scary. I've had other small creep stories, all based in the same city, funnily enough, and they're not scary per se, just uncomfortable. So, man in white, let's not meet again. This happened many years ago, so I don't remember many details, but the experience still feels vivid. It is important to be mentioned that the bedroom where I was has a view to the backyard and the kitchen. So, my story took place at my previous home when I was 10. I was alone with my sister, who was 4 at the time, but later my parents came home after Mass. The TV was on and showing a comedy program, but I wasn't very interested. After some time, I noticed what I thought was a person in the corner of my eye. But at a second glance, I realized it wasn't exactly a person. It was a child with curly hair. The silhouette resembled that. And my reaction was nothing but freak out. I was losing my mind, thinking about going to find out what it was or call someone. My sister was sleeping, so she didn't know about it until I told my parents. After some minutes, I managed to calm myself down and wait in that room until my parents came home. Nobody believed me at that moment. And during those years, we didn't have any cameras or smartphones. Some years later, I found out about shadow people, and my experience fits with the stories told. I don't know what to think about that, but always remember that day, even after I moved out. When I was 17, a senior in high school class of 1997, I stayed with a family in West Ireland as part of my church's program abroad. I lived there for 6 months. The family's home was a cottage-style home, very old, but comfortable and loving. Those were my thoughts, as we pulled up to the front anyway. After I had spent a little time there, I began to feel something heavier. Something silent, yet consuming. At first I kept telling myself, new places, new faces, it's all just new, and that's why you feel this way. Regardless of what I told myself, though, it was impossible to stop the feeling that I had in my gut. The feeling didn't only stay there either. It grew. I had nightmares nearly every night. Before I had never so much as remembered my dreams, much less suffered from night terrors. I would wake up with the covers thrown off of my body, off of my bed entirely. Sometimes, I swear, I would wake up just as it was happening, and when I did, there was almost always a cold chill in the air, even in the summer months. There was a boy there, the owner's son Eric, who I asked whether anyone had ever complained about the draft that would seemingly come from nowhere in that room, the room where I stayed. He told me that there was probably something wrong with the window. He didn't look comfortable talking about it at all. In fact, Eric tried to avoid eye contact and interactions with me in general throughout the duration of my stay. He really wanted to avoid my inquiries. Back to the nightmares. They almost always involved me trying to find the source of this icy cold breeze, with me walking aimlessly around this one room, my room. The chill would almost start to burn my skin. You aren't supposed to be able to feel pain in your dreams, right? Well, I did. So were these actually nightmares, or something else? I still don't know. Eventually, the nightmares got to the point where I could hardly move inside the dream. I would be bound to my bed, stuck looking around the room. By this time, it wasn't just the nightmares or the blankets that scared me. It was waking up in pain that left me feeling out of control, terrified. I would have visible marks, not scratches, but rather patches of irritated skin. Small rashes that burned. My stomach would ache a horrible pain as though it were eating itself. Again I approached Eric, the son who slept just 2 rooms down from mine. I asked, or told him rather, there is something seriously wrong with that room. I then showed him my rash and began to explain the nightmares. He was visibly uncomfortable, and then started calling for his mother, Nancy. I liked Nancy. She wasn't as strict as my mother, who was 10 years older than Nancy, deeply religious, and highly skeptical about pretty much everything. I respected my mother, don't get me wrong, but I didn't exactly feel like she listened to me when I spoke about too much anything, really. And as much as I liked Nancy, I just wasn't sure how she would respond to me asking me about everything. I was quite nervous. Nancy spoke with genuine conviction. She talked as though she had lived 1,000 lives, but she also felt incredibly open, if that resonates with anyone. She filled me in on all the local history as we walked through the town and the church. Over the last few months, we spoke of the Great Freeze and the famine that the area had suffered many years ago. She talked about the rebuild. She taught me a lot of things about Irish history and culture, and I found it very interesting that she was a member of their historical society. I had asked Nancy about ghosts before, just general questions, really. Like, had she ever seen one? Would I possibly see one? She laughed, and told me to consider myself lucky if I had seen one on my trip. That she had not seen one in years. I sort of took this to mean my question was silly, that there was no such thing as ghosts in Ireland or something to that effect. Turns out, I was wrong. Eric tells Nancy, "Corinne says there's something wrong with her room. She even got proof." He shifts his gaze to me and nods, saying, "Show her your arms." My sleeves up, I shift my arms around into Nancy's view. She doesn't look surprised by the markings. "I see." She gave a long pause as she examined me before asking, "How have you been sleeping?" "Not great. I've been having nightmares for months, but now it's like I can't move." That's what I was just telling Eric. The two of them look at each other. For some reason, this spirit likes to communicate with the girls. I suppose it was because she was a young girl herself. We believe that her name is Emma. Nancy explains that the house has been in her family since the early 1900s, but prior to that, it was owned by the same family for many decades, and one other just before that. The house had survived the famine. The family didn't. It was typical for families to huddle in the highest room of the house, or for the last surviving members to stay in that type of room, typically children. They didn't always survive. There were several deaths during that time. I was convinced that the area itself was inherently haunted by that point. "Why do you think her name is Emma? Have you spoken with her?" I asked Nancy. "My sister did," Eric piped up. "That was her old room." Nancy cut in. "Yes, she used a Ouija board, which she didn't have permission to do, by the way. And she says the girl's name is Emma. She died here, in this house, in that room. She died hungry and freezing. Your rashes are probably the early stages of frostbite," Eric said, adding more eeriness to the vibe. There was a bit of silence after his statement. I was feeling better, actually. Not about what he said, just in knowing that I had experienced something that someone else had as well. "Did your daughter get these rashes?" They both confirmed that yes, she did. "Well, how did she get it to stop?" "She moved out," they said in unison. Attempting to break the slight tension that had begun to build, Nancy tells me, "You're welcome to sleep on the sofa. Might not be very comfortable given the state of your arms, but it might suit you better." At that point, I had just 1 month left out of my 6-month stint. I opted to sleep on the couch, but left my things in the room. Every time I entered the room, I would say hello and goodbye to Emma. Once I started sleeping on the couch, my dreams returned to normal. I actually mentioned to them that they should offer the couch first to any future guests, as the improvement was so drastic. They explained to me that they didn't get many guests anymore. Apparently, word had gotten around that their guest room was occupied, if you will. My mom must have missed that memo. They weren't even willing to entertain that what I had experienced was real. Not that I was expecting much. They were by no means an open-minded pair. I ended by saying that when I left for good, I tried to give a pep talk of sorts to Emma. I think she was struggling either to move on, be heard, maybe both. The next time I paid them a visit was on the 10-year anniversary of when I had been living there, 2017. On that visit, I got to meet the sister. She, Eric, and I walked through the old guest room, which had been converted into a sort of sewing room. The sister looked at me and asked if I could feel a difference. I stood there a minute, and closing my eyes, allowing myself to relax, I didn't feel anything except for sunshine coming through the window and tickling my face. I looked over at her and said, "It's lighter." And that made both of us smile. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was around 15, 16 years old, so it was around 2005 or 2006. Now, for context, this happened in France in a medium-sized city. I had to take one bus and one tramway, to get to my high school. It was about 45 minutes to a 1-hour trip. Usually classes start at 8:15 a.m. and the tram would be packed up with people as my high school was located next to the university and another high school. But that day my class started at 10 a.m. As a result, the tram was practically empty, which meant that I could get a seat for once. There was no seat by my side, only one seat in front of me. So I was sitting there listening to my music when a man sat down in front of me. He quickly started talking to me. I honestly don't remember what he was saying, but I was trying not to be rude as he seemed to have some sort of mild mental disability. But very quickly he started asking me out. Remember, I was underage and I definitely looked my age. He wondered if I wanted to go and get a drink. I said that I couldn't, that I had to go to class. He was very persistent. At some point he took out his wallet and offered me money. I remember him saying something like, "If it's about money, don't worry about it." He pulled out about $200 in cash. I was already creeped out by now and couldn't wait to get out of that tram, but I was also too shy to get out and sit somewhere else. That's when he pulled out a piece of paper. He was holding it in the air, and I remember him doing a motion with his head like, "Look at this" type of motion. It was an article from a newspaper that he had cut and kept inside of his wallet. I only had a few seconds to read what the article was about. All I had time to see was that something had happened to a woman. She had been assaulted. But that's it. That's all I had time to read before he put it back away. Now, as if this wasn't creepy enough, he had a giant smile on his face, like he was proud of himself, that type of smile. Whether he knew that woman or if this was a random article he for some reason decided to keep with him at all times, it's just extremely unsettling. Not only that, but showing it to a random girl? Why? The piece of paper itself looked like it's been in his wallet for some time. It was a little torn, but definitely wasn't old. I eventually arrived at my stop. He kept insisting on meeting again. I denied and quickly walked to my school. After that, I saw him again, once, a few days later. This time the tram was packed again, but I still felt the need to hide behind the people surrounding me, just in case he would see me and come talk to me again. The second time I saw him was maybe 2 or 3 years after. He looked exactly the same. I recognized him instantly. He was walking in the streets of the city and didn't see me. I realized I didn't give a physical description of the man, so here it is. He was average height, dark brown hair on the chubby side. He had glasses on, and the 3 times I saw him, he was always carrying a big backpack. The exact same military green backpack, and the same jacket. When I was a kid, younger than 12, my mom took me to visit her old friends at their apartment. It was decorated in an odd fashion. Tapestries hung all over the place with old antique furniture and knickknacks lining the walls. We didn't visit there long at all. On our way out the door, my mom pointed out a statue that they had in their living room. It had a beard, eyes that looked straight ahead, and a walking stick that connected to the base of the statue. It was about half my height, hand-carved solid dark wood, and was sort of tribal-looking. I remember thinking, I really hope they don't offer to let her have that thing. It's scary. And, of course, they gave it to her. I felt uncomfortable sharing the car ride back home with the statue. My mom was raving about how cool it was all the way there. I couldn't have been less happy. After we made it back, she placed it down next to the fridge in the kitchen, right outside the entryway. That sucked because our kitchen was the center of our house. Anywhere you wanted to go, you usually had to walk through the kitchen. So I told my mom how much I hated the statue, and how I really hated the idea of it being there in particular. My mom told me that I was just being silly, so there it stayed. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the statue being on the other end of the house, and it terrified me. It made me feel unsafe. I don't know what I found to be so threatening about it, but the next day my grandmother agreed with my feelings. She told my mom that the statue made her very uneasy, and that it had a negative energy. My mom told her that she was overreacting, and that she wasn't getting rid of the statue. I felt constant anxiety. I would often refuse to leave my bedroom in the morning after having violent nightmares involving the statue. It was always something along the lines of the statue becoming animate and stabbing me to death with its walking stick. When I walked through the kitchen, I would literally push my back against the wall and edge around the room to avoid getting near the damn thing. In time, even my mom's friends agreed that it kinda weirded them out too. I hated it. And despite how much it scared people, my mom still wouldn't get rid of it. Though she did finally agree to move it to the living room in a more secluded space. One night I was sitting in the dining room doing my homework, and my mom was in the living room with her friend. I heard whispering that was akin to what you'd hear in a horror movie. Cryptic, overlapping, incoherent whispers. I immediately knew that the voices didn't belong to my mom or her friend, so I went into the living room to ask them if they had heard anything, and before I could speak, the look on their faces told me everything. My mom told me to come closer to her and said, "We heard them too." We all agreed that the sound was unmistakably close to us, and it was clear as day. The source of the sound had come from, you guessed it, around the same spot that the statue had been moved to. We all just sort of stared at the statue for a minute blankly, and I don't remember what else was said after that. But still, my mom refused to get rid of the statue. The nightmares continued. My anxiety grew worse and worse. Bad things constantly happened in the house. My mom got pregnant sometime around then and had to be hospitalized, so I went to live with my grandma for a bit.
I told her all about how my mom never got rid of the statue and how I had never felt safe since it arrived. I told her about the nights that I felt someone looming over me and the times when I locked myself in the bathroom because I heard noise coming from it. After my mom delivered my baby brother, I moved back home. My grandma explained to me that she had burnt the statue long ago and didn't care how my mom felt about it because I didn't deserve to live in fear over a stupid piece of wood. Once the statue was long gone, my mom finally stopped being stubborn and agreed that strange things had occurred. I was finally able to walk through my house again without tiptoeing around it, but sometimes I still felt off about the house after that.
This happened in October of 2019. So it was a weekend, and I figured it would be a good idea to get out of town for the day and introduce my girlfriend to my mom for the first time. She lives out on the plains on 40 acres. The house and land are a fourth of a mile off the road into the field, with our long driveway dividing the land of two neighbors. We arrived around noon, and my brother and his wife also happened to be out there visiting that day, so I introduced the girlfriend to everyone and the dogs. I noticed that the loudest and most obnoxious dog, the beagle, didn't come to greet us, and my mom explained that the previous night she went to grab something from the truck, and on her way in the dog had darted out the door and ran off into the field, and still hadn't come back. This isn't all that uncommon for a dog to run off in the night and come back a couple of days later. Later that day, my mom recalls that her and my nieces were woken up around 1 a.m. to all the dogs howling and barking non-stop, just going nuts. Eventually they stop, and everyone gets to go back to sleep. We continue to have a nice quiet day out in the middle of nowhere for a few more hours, when we notice that this hawk has been flying around the same spot all day in the field. So my brother and his wife go to check it out, while I mess around doing something else. A few minutes later, my brother comes back and tells me he found the missing beagle, but something is wrong. I should go check it out before telling my mom. I follow my brother out into the field, expecting to find a dead dog. As we were walking, I see a spot of blood and think it was probably coyotes. He shows me a trail of blood that leads to a larger puddle and another trail. The dog seems to have been drug around some. The trail led to an area in the field where the dog lay. As soon as I saw the dog, something looked wrong about the scene. All the plants around him were trampled, and something looked different about him. I took a few more steps, and I realized that he was missing skin. This wasn't just a few bits missing from a fight or birds picking at him. The only fur or skin left on him was his head, tail, and paws, with very distinguished straight lines where he had been skinned. Some sick fuck had killed, skinned, and taken the pelt of our dog in the middle of the night, only a couple of 100 feet from the front door. Of course we called the cops. They took 2 hours to arrive. They took pictures. We looked around the area and noticed tire tracks, but we couldn't tell how old they were. We also found a pile of horse shit that looked pretty fresh close by. Did whoever did this ride a horse out there? To this day, the cops have never followed up with anything, and nothing else has happened. Nature cams were installed, and fences have been mended so dogs can't get out, but we still have no idea who did it. I came across the pictures on my phone today, and can't seem to bring myself to delete them. I'm not saying we have a ghost, spook, or spirit, but something phenomenological is definitely happening in our home. The brief background on the home is that it's over 70 years old in an older part of our town. The previous resident was a well-respected attorney in the area, and he died here. We wouldn't learn this until after we moved in. The house was almost completely dismantled and rebuilt with new everything. Paint, electric, plumbing, drywall, etc. One floor, not a whole lot of square footage. An attic that has about 2.5 feet of clearance. Not long after getting moved in, my wife and I learned a little bit more about the house's history, and that the previous owner had passed away, and that it was quite some time after his death before he was discovered. We made peace with this information, and continued settling in. The first peculiar incident wasn't really that peculiar. It had been well over a year since the previous owner passed, but he kept receiving mail. A lot of mail. Fun mail, too. Magazines and newspapers with the subscriptions renewing. We remarked on the mail as being merely interesting, and for the sake of creating a tradition, we always kept the old attorney's mail for a day or two, in case he just wanted to read it. Eventually, this would trickle to a stop. The second peculiar incident caught our attention. After 2 months of being in the house, we decided to get newer, better locks for the doors. I had a new key, my wife had a new key. 2 extra keys went on the key hook. A few days go by, and my wife asked me if I had lost my key or if I had trouble locking or unlocking the door. I hadn't. She showed me the 2 extra keys. Both were still on the wire ring, and both had bends of about 15 degrees right at the key shoulder. We agreed that this was odd, but we let it go with some loose rationalizations. The third peculiar incident started a little over 2 years ago, and continues still. Neither I nor my wife smoke. However, about once every 2 weeks on a random day, and usually after midnight, the distinct odor of warm cigarette smoke can be smelled in our living room. At first, we thought it was someone walking nearby, or a neighbor, or an odd or unfortunate combination of smells from a garbage can. We got some cameras, and pointed them outside to see what we could see. Nothing. The last time we smelled cigarettes was about 2 weeks ago. And we've had electricians check our wiring on unrelated matters just in case. The fourth incident relates to the second. 2 metal spoons in the silverware drawer were bent. Almost snapped. Aside from the cigarette smoke, it's been a while since anything has happened, until last week. For whatever reason, the attorney's mail is resumed and the 5th peculiar incident has occurred. I work out in the woods, and my wife now works from home in the company of our 2 cats. In a flurry of texts and phone calls, she told me that it sounded like someone was running around upstairs, as if they were rushing across the house to answer the phone, was how she described it. We've had squirrels in our useless attic and the occasional tree branch. The footsteps exceeded both of those. The 6th and most recent peculiar incident is equal parts mundane and intriguing. We have a favorite spatula. Yes, we do. Some of you reading this probably have your own favorite spatula, spoon, fork, pot, pan as well. We used the bright robin's egg blue utensil to make our Thanksgiving dinner and set it aside with the rest of the cooking detritus. That evening, and the following morning, the kitchen is cleaned and everything is put away. Sunday began the greater holiday baking season, requiring the favorite spatula. Except, it was missing. The ceramic container where the utensils are stored has everything else. Red things, green things, metal things, wooden things. Visual inspection of the surrounding area results in zilch. Every cupboard and drawer opened and investigated to nothing. We sadly conclude that after the big cleanup, it must have ended up in the trash. So we began an online hunt for its replacement. On Friday last, I get a picture of the utensils sitting quite happily amongst all the others. I was confused by this, since the evening before we had to use other tools instead of the missing spatula because it was missing.
So, sometime after 9:30 p.m. Thursday and 7:18 a.m. on Friday, something that was missing for at least 5 days returned. So, here it is in order. 1. A confluence of strange coincidences. 2. Sleepwalking. 3. Someone is managing to live in our attic. 4. That I and my wife are in a weirdly mutual prank cycle. Or 5. Something real is happening. If you have any ideas, tests, solutions, resources, or suggestions, I'm listening. Nothing seems malvoyant about what's been happening, but it's definitely happening. Among the many ghost stories told during lull periods of lengthy military exercises, the one that stood out the most in Singapore is probably that of the Third Door Charlie Company. In short, it was about how a third door was made to allow the spirit of a recruit who had died a gruesome and mysterious death to leave peacefully. There was even a local movie made about the incident called 2359 that you can find on YouTube. I have personally seen this third door, so there's at least some credence to the story. My story, however, happened many years later when the camp was largely unused. My company was planning to use the rifle range near the camp for our annual rifle proficiency test, which lasted several days. I was selected to be part of a very small advance party that would arrive a few days before the main body. The barracks of the camp were essentially longhouses separated by their respective toilets and laundry areas. My platoon mates and I would occupy one of the longhouses during the night, where we would play cards and tell creepy stories to pass time. It was almost midnight, and I needed to relieve myself. I had just stepped out of the barrack when I noticed that the lights of the toilet belonging to the Charlie Company had suddenly come on. The bright white light cast a clear shadow of a man onto the water point of the laundry area. I froze. There was a voice telling me to investigate, while another told me to go and grab my friends. The shadow didn't seem to budge at all during the entire time that I was observing it. Then, I heard my friend calling out for me. This snapped me out of my reverie as I rushed back in and pulled my friends out to show them what I had seen. By then, however, the lights had already gone back off. My friends suggested that it was probably the range warden, which was the only logical explanation. What really puzzled me then was that my friend had called out to me because I had been gone for too long, but yet, in my mind, the whole thing only lasted for a minute or two. The next day, I quizzed the range warden about the incident, and a worried look came over his face as he explained that he was nowhere near the camp the night before. What's more perplexing was that the power to Charlie Company had been cut.
This all happened very recently. I'm a young woman who works late nights at a bar in a city, but I live in a rural area outside of town. It was a very slow night, so we closed early and one of the bouncers walked me to my car. I didn't particularly notice anyone following me while I was on the main roads, just a normal sprinkling of traffic. I first noticed them when they turned onto one of the super small roads that leads toward the area where I live. It was strange because people rarely pull off onto that road at the same time as me, as it isn't very populated at all. But as soon as we were on the winding and unlit road, they began to behave strangely. They'd flash their bright lights at me, and then ride my bumper until they were practically scraping it, and then pull really far back away. I tried speeding up and slowing down, but that didn't seem to matter. When we came to the first intersection, they turned on their signal to go right, but when I went straight, I watched them in my mirror turn the nose of their car to the right, pause for a few seconds, and then follow behind me. This continued for a while. At the next intersection, I signaled left and waited until they did too, and then quickly turned right, and of course, they followed. I then called the cops and told them I was headed toward a gas station I knew to be open and was the only place remotely nearby that might have people at it, since almost nothing is 24-hour right now. They said they dispatched police to meet me there, and I tried to focus on driving slowly so that I didn't beat them. When I got to the gas station, I pulled into the little turn lane, which made the car pause and then quickly step on the gas and squeal around the corner. I only really had time to glimpse at the general look of the car and the driver's face. They were alone and very weird looking. Incredibly pale, like albino pale, with short, equally pale hair. They were completely androgynous, at least from what I could see, and they stared at me for a second before bolting away. The police took like 20 minutes to arrive after that. Typical. So I just sat in front of the gas station and watched the road for cars with my doors locked. The police said there wasn't anything they could do. My general assumption was that it was a patron from work, but we'd had so few customers, I feel like I would have recognized them. I don't understand why they would have followed me the full hour, only to begin making themselves that obvious. When I was around 12, maybe 13 years old, I'm 24 now, I was staying at my dad's house for the weekend. We watched movies and ate junk food, a usual occurrence when I got to see him. My brother was also usually with us, but this time he was staying with a friend that night. I decided it was time for bed around 11 that evening. I went for my routine, getting ready for bed. He decided that it was time for bed around 11 that evening, and I went about my usual routine, getting ready for sleep. I laid down and tried to pass out. I was restless this night for some reason, just feeling completely uneasy. My bed used to be vertical to the door with my feet closest to the door. I always used to sleep with my door open. I guess it gave me some comfort being able to see half of the entrance to my dad's door, knowing that he wasn't far away. Anyway, as I said, I just couldn't get to sleep, and frustrated, I laid there staring at my ceiling for a moment, and then felt as if someone were watching me. I shifted my eyes to the doorway, and a pitch-black figure was standing there, its head almost touching the top of the frame. I've never had an issue with sleep paralysis, and never have had it since, but then, in that moment, I could not move. All I could do was look at this tall figure that stood there, staring at me. Tears began to flow down my cheeks, and my heart felt as if it were going to beat out of my chest. I managed to barely whisper, "Dad?" And it turned its head sideways at me as if it were confused. I began hyperventilating intensely, which must have woken my dad because he came running into my room, and as he came through the door, the figure dissolved, as if a breeze came by, and it went away with it. My dad held me as I cried. I slept in his room that night, and for the rest of my stay there until I went back to my mom's. This event shook me to my core, and to this day, I cannot and will not sleep with an open door. I still have a deep feeling of fear, and almost want to cry when I picture that thing, and remember that night. In the early 2000s, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents had just gotten through divorce, and my mom started dating this guy. He would come over to our house regularly. Things didn't seem that bad at first, but he actually drank daily. This was something I didn't understand yet at my age, but yeah. So this guy wasn't all that bad with my sister, who was 2 or 3 at the time, but he took some sadistic interest in hurting me. He would arrive at our house almost every day, and the first thing he would do was take off his belt and start beating me with it. This got to the point where I would hide if I knew he was coming. As for why my mother didn't leave him then, he threatened to kill us if she did. Now, this one incident is burned into my memory. On one random day, he had found a nice little cardboard box. He picked me up and shoved me into said box and sat on top of it. My mother was doing the dishes, and I assumed she couldn't hear me screaming for her as I peered out of the box's handle hole at her back, before he covered the holes with his hands. I screamed for a good few minutes as this asshole just laughed about torturing me. The only reason he got off the box was that I had a small screwdriver in my pocket that I used to stab him right in his ass cheek. This got him to fly up off the box, and pissed him off because he wasn't having fun anymore. He picked me up again and carried me off to my room, where he proceeded to beat me with his belt. Then he left me in my room after taking my lamp and locked my door. I was afraid of the dark, so I cried and screamed some more. I did so until he finally left, and my mother came and opened my door again. The random beatings would go on until he eventually got in trouble for something and ended up going to jail. Sometimes I think maybe my mother called the police on him. He called my mom from jail and told her that if she found anyone else, that he would kill her, me, and my younger sister. We ended up moving 3 cities over, and as far as I know, my mom never heard from him again. This guy is almost single-handedly responsible for several of my long-term phobias, and as an adult now, I'd kick his ass if I saw him again. I'm 30 now. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I was into really weird stuff. There's a few local shops that sell unusual oddities and antiques in my town, like art made from dead animals, skulls, pickled specimens, things like that. I started pickling my own specimens around age 20, when I figured out that it wasn't that hard. I had some articulated skeletons, but stuff that I was really interested in was supposedly cursed stuff. I bought things people claimed were cursed on eBay, and even drove to different states to buy things from people that they claimed were haunted. I bought 3 different diebuck boxes supposedly cursed from eBay. I bought numerous haunted dolls, whatever I could find. I had some weird taxidermy items too, like a couple 2-headed baby chickens, a 2-headed snake, stuff like that. I had a few things that I wasn't supposed to have either, but I won't get into that. Long story short, nothing weird ever happened. Not a thing. I never had one unusual, creepy experience with any of this stuff. I should start this off by saying, I've never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a skeptic, because I think to use that term you have to go into something deciding that it isn't real and operate from that perspective. I'm fine with saying I have no idea what it is and I can't explain it. I won't say that I don't believe in ghosts, because I really don't know what a ghost is or what it's supposed to be. I've always been into aliens, and was really obsessed with them when I was younger, but still never fully believed in them. I just kinda liked the idea of them. I'd never seen one, or seen any real proof of one, despite poring over documentary and late-night History Channel binges. So, on the subject of all things paranormal, you might could say that I'm a fox molder and that I want to believe, but never really did. Anyway, needless to say, after the following series of events, my mind is quite a bit more open. Though I won't pretend that I can tell you exactly what was going on. So I'm around 21 years old and I'm working at Walmart at the time. We had these steps that we would smoke on that were outside the tire shop that would lead up to another parking lot for a different building. I went out to smoke one day and was by myself and sat at the top of the stairs. As I was smoking, I noticed a paper bag sitting kind of underneath the bushes that were there. I don't know why, but I looked in it. I was expecting to find some empty beer bottles or something, but inside of the bag was a porcelain lamb. It wasn't particularly creepy looking, to be honest. It didn't have bleeding eyes or whatever. It just looked like something that would be on your grandma's shelf. There was a red ribbon around its neck, and it looked really new. When I picked it up, there was a note underneath it in the bag. The note said, "Take me home. I'll be a good little bitch, I promise." I'm not even kidding, it really said that. It was written in red ink and looked like female handwriting. Really neat. It was written on a piece of torn out standard notebook paper. I know how stupid and cliche that it sounds, but that really is what it said. Of course, being me, I brought the thing inside Walmart and stashed it under a register because I was totally gonna take that home. I showed it to my friend who was working there and was kind of like, "Dude, look what I just found outside. Look at this note." And he was like, you should definitely not take that home." But of course I was gonna take it home. I lived for that kind of thing. Anyway, as soon as I set it down, I realized that it was actually a music box, because I jarred it enough, I guess, to make it start playing. I looked at the bottom of it, and it had one of those metal twist pins that you wind up and it plays a tune. I turned it, and it was the least intimidating melody ever. It wasn't creepy at all. I was actually getting legit disappointed, because if you wanted to pull a prank on someone with some scary object, this thing was doing it all wrong. I'm not sure what the melody was. I'd never heard it before, but it was in no way ominous. Fast forward to the end of the workday. I get in my car, come home, and show my then girlfriend. She was into all the same weird things that I was, so she was equally excited about this bizarre discovery. We cleared a space on our dresser for it, and from then on we just referred to it as the lamb. Things started happening immediately, like the next day. Me and my ex didn't have a great relationship, and I spent most of my time in the living room while she hung out in the bedroom. I'd work until around 11 at night, and get home and stay on my computer playing games until around 3 a.m. Then, once she was asleep, I'd go in the bedroom and go to sleep myself. This way, we didn't really have to spend that much time together, and we both quietly preferred it that way. So, the very next day, I'm sitting in the living room and I hear a rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I could see the entire kitchen from where my computer was, and I assumed that it was one of our cats messing with something, but both cats were actually on the floor staring at the kitchen, just as confused as I was. The sound seemed like it was coming from the top of the fridge, and it was like it was rustling around the cereal boxes and bags of chips and such that were up there. I assumed it was a mouse because we had found one in there before, and went over to the kitchen to check for it. I turned on the light, and as I walked in the kitchen, I heard the Grudge noise. I've only seen The Grudge once, because it was one of the only films that ever actually scared me. I'm not easily frightened, and I generally don't care that much for horror movies, but something about the long, frog-like, gurgling croak sound of The Grudge freaked me out when I was younger. The only similar thing that scared me recently was the screaming bear in Annihilation. Anyway, I start walking toward the fridge and I'm totally hearing the Grudge noise. Just to reiterate, this is only impactful because this is literally one of the only things that I've ever been scared of, and it was coming directly from the top of the fridge where the rustling sound had been. I froze dead in place, and so did my cats. They did not want to go anywhere near that. I had no idea what to do. I was literally on the verge of passing out. So I tried to articulate this in my head, and I decided that the fridge must be broken, that a fan or something in it must be grinding. I crammed that thought into my head, and I sat back down in my chair and put on my headphones. I did leave the light on, I'll admit. Normally, I sat in total darkness. I was really trying to convince myself that the fridge was making that sound, but I was finding it incredibly hard to do so. I was also in panic mode, and I was thinking, what do movies and ghost shows and stuff say? Don't acknowledge that it exists? So I became the dad in every horror film, and I just said, "The fridge is broken," and went back to playing WoW while on the verge of jumping out of my own skin and using my headphones to drown out the noise. I actually sat there for way longer than I normally even played WoW because I was genuinely terrified to either move or take my headphones off. I had this horrible thought in my head that as soon as I removed my headphones, I would hear the noise like right next to my ear and turn, and some old woman would eat my face or something. I had no idea how long it went on or when it stopped. I literally sat there until sunrise. I never went to sleep, and I used an Elvis playlist and chatting to my guildmates in WoW to distract me as best as I could. But I literally just sat there frozen in terror the entire night until the sun came up and my girlfriend woke up. She came in the living room around 8 a.m. and was pissed off at me because I never went to bed. She complained that I played games too much, even though we both knew she didn't want me around any more than I wanted to be around her. But our relationship issues aside, she was badgering me about being on the computer all night, and I just said, I don't want to talk about it. And she let it go. She softened up quite a bit, looked a little confused, but I think that she could tell I was freaked out. Then she proceeded to freak me out even further. She showed me her arm and said the cat scratched the hell out of me last night. And she did indeed have what appeared to be a cat scratch running down the length of her forearm. The problem was, she kept the bedroom door closed, and like I said, both of the cats were in the living room with me, and I hadn't moved from that chair. No one let the cat in the bedroom. In fact, when sunrise came, they were still almost in the exact same spot staring at the kitchen that they had been in when I went back to playing WoW. I didn't say anything about it. I just said, oh, dang, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Since I hadn't slept, I called into work that day, even though in reality I really just wanted to leave. So I did an unusual thing, and me and my girlfriend went bowling for the day, then to a movie, then dinner. I was clearly acting weird because we never did anything together, and I was obviously trying to avoid the house. I asked if she wanted to go night fishing, and she finally asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't tell her though. I didn't want to talk about it. She declined my generous offer to fish in the dark, and we ended up going home. We started our nightly ritual. She retired to the bedroom to watch TV, and I stayed in the living room. The grudge noise started within an hour of me sitting down. This time, as soon as it started, I willed my completely stiff in fear body to get up and walk down the hall to the bathroom. I left my computer running and WoW open, and said I felt like watching TV. My girlfriend again remarked that I was acting weird, and I again declined to talk about it. I couldn't hear the grudge noise from the bedroom. I took some Benadryl and went to sleep when she did, which was hours before I normally went to bed. The next day I went to work, and at around 9 p.m. she called me. I was the manager of the toys department, and had a bit of leeway in using my phone, since no one really supervised me. I answered, and she was on the phone freaking out, screaming into my ear, and I could hear knocking in the background and couldn't really make out what she was saying. But finally, I made out a sentence. She was saying, "There's banging, someone's trying to get in through the walls." I left work and drove home and stayed on the phone with her the whole time, and at some point on my drive home, she left the house and started running down the street. I picked her up in her pajamas as I was driving back, and she again claimed that someone was trying to break in through the walls. She heard banging on all 4 walls of the bedroom. By this point, I was pretty certain I knew exactly what she was hearing, but I still didn't want to say anything about it. I wanted her to calm down, and I told her that it was just animals. I said that I had seen some squirrels going into a hole in the side of the wall and was afraid that we might have them in our walls. Of course, this was entirely made up, but it actually worked, and she did calm down. She didn't know squirrels could live in your walls, and I convinced her that this was the case, and I told her that I would call an exterminator in the morning and have them come out and check on everything. We went back to the house, much to my despair. My squirrel story had worked on her, but that was short-lived. The way our house was set up, we had a bathroom that was connected to our bedroom, but not by a door, just by the wall. So you had to leave our bedroom, and the bathroom was the next room on the right. So the bathroom wall and our bedroom wall were the same wall. Make sense? Anyway, we got inside, she went to the bathroom and immediately started screaming again. I went in there to see what she was screaming at, and it looked like a tiger had been clawing at the bedroom wall, the one connected to our wall. The wallpaper was torn off about 6 feet high, and there were large gashes in the drywall beneath it. Reminder, this is all about 4 days into having this lamb. At this point, we got in the car and I told her about the sound I had been hearing. Her initial reaction was that we needed to get rid of the lamb, but something told me that I couldn't. She wanted to just donate it to a thrift shop or something, but I had this weird sense of unease about doing so. I felt like we couldn't just get rid of it that way. Like someone had to know what it was and want to take it from us. I can't explain why I felt that way. I just did. At this point, we did what you probably would not expect, and we actually just lived with it. Like, this went on every day. We had rules about it. The first rule was that we never talked about it in the house. We never even mentioned it. We pretended that the lamb did not even exist. It was like that episode of Family Guy where they had a giant octopus living in the house and just no one wanted to talk about it. When we had something to say about it, we would always say, "Let's go for a drive," and the other person would know what that meant. The clawing at the bathroom wall was getting deeper all the time. Eventually, there was a huge hole in the drywall, and it was starting to claw through the drywall that was connected to our bedroom. That was when I really started to freak out. For about a year, we lived with everything. We just ignored it and pretended like nothing was happening. Every night, I sat with the grudge noise. Things would fly off of shelves, doors would slam. Straight up paranormal activity, BS, every single day. One of the worst ones was one of our pickled specimens jars just exploded. It was a bird that we had had for a while, and the mason jar exploded on the mantel in the living room. Glass went everywhere, and it took hours to find it all. The bird itself also completely exploded, sending body parts splattering around the living room. It was hell. And I had a few friends that I would tell about it every day when I came into work. Like, they would ask for updates on what the lamb had been doing, and I would tell them whatever freaky story we had for the previous day. It was a daily occurrence at that point. But then, it got to a point where we couldn't ignore it anymore. My girlfriend was waking up with bruises and scratches almost every day to the point that it had started looking like she was self-harming. She had a lot of piercings and tattoos, so she wasn't too troubled by the pain, but didn't really enjoy having to wash the blood out of the sheets every day. When it got too much was when I was sitting in the bathroom, browsing my phone, and I heard a female voice say, "Hey, come here." So I finished my business and walked into the bedroom and said, "Did you call me?" And she replied with, "I was really hoping that was you." This is about 6 months in. At this point, it started talking, like literally speaking. It had a little girl's voice. I know, again, that's so cliche and stupid sounding, but it would occasionally speak, and we would hear it. We never responded to it. Everything we'd read on the subject told us to never, ever respond. We'd hear it at our door at night, saying things like, "Can I come in, please? Please let me in." At this point, you've probably tuned this out and chalked this up as some kind of excessively long, poorly written creepypasta, but I promise you, it isn't. Her whole family knew about it as well. All my friends did. Everyone knew about this thing. When we had friends come over, they would ask us about certain things that the lamb had destroyed, like, "What's up with the bathroom wall?" And we'd just respond by shaking our heads, and they got the message. Eventually, no one came to our place anymore. They all said that it freaked them out to be there and that they were terrified just to walk inside. Even her parents stopped coming over. Her mother wouldn't even drive down our street. Still, we ignored it. As best we could, anyway. Until one night, I'm sitting on my computer, and a voice right behind me says, "Hey." I thought it was my girlfriend, so without turning around, I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And the voice responded, "Nothing." Then I realized that it wasn't her voice, and I spun around, and nothing was there. I just broke the cardinal rule, and I talked to it. I shot a brick, grabbed my girlfriend, and told her what I did while we drove around in the car. She proceeded to call me an idiot for an hour and asked what we were going to do now. Finally, I decided to Google local paranormal investigators. We contacted a local agency and sent them an email with a more condensed version of everything I've just told you. They responded in a few hours and asked me to send them a picture of the lamb. That was the first time since the day we set it down that I had ever touched it again. I put it in the middle of the kitchen table, grabbed my camera, and took some pictures of it. I sent the pics away in an email and nothing. Until this point, these people had been responding to me in a matter of hours, and now suddenly, an entire day had gone by. Then 2 days. In those 2 days, everything had escalated tenfold. The house was never quiet now. The grudge noise could be heard outside of the house, and it never stopped. Half the electronics didn't work. The TV barely worked. It would flicker on and off. The power would go on and off. The taps would start running and then close. The garbage disposal would turn on. The doors were slamming and opening non-stop. It was completely out of control, and we couldn't stay in the house anymore. Mind you, I wasn't rich. I'm living on a Walmart salary here, but we got a hotel room. I brought a laptop, and I emailed the paranormal investigators again. They replied to me this time and told me the lady who answers the emails was also their, medium or whatever, and that when I sent her the pictures, she locked herself in her house and has refused to come out for the past 2 days. They told me they were sorry, but that whatever I had was out of their league. So great, right? My house is possessed, and now it's gone apeshit because I talked to it, and the paranormal investigators don't even want to mess with it. I contemplated calling a priest or something, but I'm not religious, and I didn't know if I would have to have faith in the Lord Jesus or whatever for it to work. I contacted another paranormal investigations company in the area and sent them the same pics and basically begged them for help. This time they actually responded and were helpful, and they drove down from about 2 hours away just to talk to us. When they showed up at our house, nothing was happening. It was quiet, and everything looked normal. The doors were all closed, no sounds, nothing. Worse yet, they busted out all these gadgets that I'm not going to pretend I knew what they did or what they were for. Some had lights, some made beeps, some buzzed, one made little lasers all over the house. They had recorders, microphone equipment, they saged everywhere, walked around waggling electronics at various locations. I don't know exactly what the hell they were doing, but I at least appreciated that they seemed to be trying. But they weren't getting anything. Nothing was happening. I even recorded bits of it on my own camera. Then all of a sudden, stuff did happen. My camera quit working out of nowhere. The battery just KO'd. All their noisy equipment started making noise, and something was over 9,000. There were 3 people, and they started talking to it like, "If you're here, give me a sign." And then they asked it to knock on stuff, and this went on for 2 hours. Eventually, they wrapped up, and the woman who was with him said that she believed the thing who was inhabiting our lamb wasn't a spirit. She said it wasn't ever a person, and that it was something else. She said that it was pretending to be a child to try and trick us, and the fact that we weren't being tricked was angering it. They left and told me that she would call me the next day. She said she knew someone who might be willing to take it. I couldn't fathom who would want this thing, but my girlfriend and I spent the night in the hotel room again, and I did indeed get a call from the woman the next day. She said that she had spoken with someone called John Zaffis, and that he was excited and wanted the item. I didn't know who that was at the time. She told me he was the haunted collector, but that meant absolutely nothing to me. They said he had a paranormal museum. They came back to the house, got the lamb, and mailed the thing off to him. Later, I realized that the dude had a TV show and is the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And that's basically it. Once this Zaffis dude had agreed to take it, everything stopped. We never had another weird incident happen again. I never fixed the bathroom wall, though. We moved out when we split up, and left it like that for the people that we sold the house to. On a side note, I recently, like in the last 6 months, watched the Conjuring movies. In a very short scene, I believe, in The Conjuring 2, there's a shot of the Warrens' daughter sleeping in her bed. On her nightstand is an identical lamb to the one that I had. When I saw it, I almost started crying in terror. My grandparents have the cattle farm that little kids' fantasies are made of, complete with Native American burial sites and a creek running all the way through. The kind of place that you explore with your siblings and cousins until you are called back for dinner at the very last possible moment. My oldest cousin used to scare the rest of us by taking us into the back pasture where my grandfather had dumped the bodies of all the dead cattle. It was effective. The ground was littered with carcasses, new and old. The smell was overwhelming, and in my child's mind, this was some sort of hallowed ground to be revered and feared. A few months had passed since we went to the graveyard, and it was spring. We went to the farm as usual that weekend, and I took off into the pastures, books and blankets in tow. I loved going out and pretending that I was the first to discover a place, like most kids. I went past the creek and the tiny island where I usually pitched camp, and decided to go all the way back to the tree line, in the back pasture. I figured that the scariest thing there were the fat, old, bloated cows waiting for a vulture to strike, and I would be well past that. When I finally got to this newly cultivated spot, I remember being so happy to be so far away from the farmhouse. There were always my 3 little sisters and 5 to 8 cousins running around, not to mention the chickens, dogs, and adults. I spread my quilt on the ground and sprawled out, soaking in the sunshine, and eventually fell asleep. The next thing I remember is the sound of horses, like in the woods. Did I mention the backwoods of the back pasture? I woke up and saw 2 men stop their horses about 6 feet shy of the fence. They looked to be about 40. I was 13. I looked at them as they stared me dead in the eye while they dismounted. In a split second, I was running for that farmhouse and screaming for my grandfather, wishing I wouldn't have ventured out quite so far. I never did find out who they were. So back in high school, I was a rather shy girl. This was during or after the recession, and my family had gotten a bit tight on money. Usually I didn't eat lunch, and I had to hide that fact from the staff at the school, so I studied in the library or sat outside on the field behind the school for lunch. Rarely had I ever eaten or sat in the lunchroom. As the school year went on and neared its end, prom was coming up. I never had enough money for a prom dress, so I always turned down any offers to go, simply because I didn't want people to know that I couldn't afford a dress, let alone the ticket to go in. Between classes, when I had to walk through the cafeteria, I noticed that there was a younger boy who would always stare at me. His friends would pat his shoulder, and I read one of their lips one day as they told him to, quote-unquote, ask her. The group of boys just looking and smiling, except for the nervous one who was simply staring at me. I would look away to the floor and grip my textbooks closer to my chest, walking down another hallway. Anyway, I kept finding ways to sort of get past him without him noticing. Now I know this sounds mean, but I didn't know him. I couldn't afford it, and I also felt like he was dark inside. It was like every time I saw him, all I saw was a gray smoke around him, and there was a really uneasy feeling about it. Anyway, prom happened, and I lived right down the street from the high school, so I could hear the music and see all the kids driving down the road or walking to the school in their cool new clothes. As I sat there looking at the lights and the kids, I decided it was stupid to just watch the event happen without me, so I'd made myself go to sleep. A week or so after prom, I heard other kids in school talking about something, almost whispering. Apparently, the boy who wanted to ask me out to prom, he ended up asking another girl from another school. She said yes, but when she showed up to the house, her dad didn't like him and said that she shouldn't go. The boy then told the girl that he couldn't go to prom with her because something had come up and he wouldn't be going to prom with her at all. Those were his words. The father and the boy talked about it, and the father said that if he paid a portion for her dress, then they could go. The kid went back to the house and cut the screen to the back door with a knife. Then he unlocked it. Her father woke up and asked him what he was doing there, and the boy said, "I came to see you die," before charging at the father with a knife and a shovel. He managed to stab her dad 7 times. Her parents subdued the kid, and he was arrested and released on a $10,000 bond. The rest is history. So that's my prom night story. Oh yeah, and the dad did survive, which was great. So my story initially starts with me, an 18-year-old female, being a guitar player of 6 years. I started early in high school and loved to play. My guitar teacher was super chill and awesome, but he was no longer able to teach me as he was moving away. I felt like I still wanted to move forward with my learning, so I decided to look up other available guitar teachers nearby. I didn't have a driver's license back then, and my guitar case was too heavy for me to be traveling long distances for a couple of lessons a week. I find this one guitar instructor who lived surprisingly close, 4 or 5 streets down. We contacted, and he agreed to teach me. To give you guys a bit of an idea about this guy, he was a tall, slim, white guy. Even though he looked a tad on the scrappy side, you could definitely tell that he was strong. He would also mention how he did lots of outdoor sports. He looked to be around his early 40s, but I'm pretty sure he was actually in his mid-30s. He had these big, pale blue eyes, sunken cheeks, and was balding, had a shaved head. So yes, in retrospect, he did look rather disturbing, but I didn't want to go and judge a guy by looks at first encounter. On the first lesson, I went to his place with my guitar. But after seeing me play, he told me he couldn't teach me because he only taught beginners, even though I told him that I had played for 6 years. So for the rest of the time, we just jammed and chilled, and then I left. The next day, I got a text from him saying that he had an old guitar book he wasn't using and wanted to give to me. Earlier that day, I had a huge fight with my sister, so I was eager to get out of the house for a breather anyway. I met him at a halfway point to receive the book from him. After doing so, I said my goodbyes, but as I was leaving, he started to follow me. I was sort of confused at this point, but he just casually held conversation, so I just chatted with him on my way home. We got to my place. I dropped off the book, we played guitar together for a bit and hung out. Suddenly, he started talking to me about a waterfall near his place. I was confused because I'd never heard of this place. Why would there be a waterfall nearby? I live in an urban neighborhood. He was super shocked that I hadn't seen it and insisted that we go. It's only 10 minutes away, I promise. My stupid, naive ass agreed because he promised it was super close. So we headed out to this so-called waterfall. This is where shit went downhill. As we were walking to the waterfall, the conversation started to change. He asked what nationality I am, so I told him that I'm Korean. Suddenly, he hugged me super hard, saying, "I love Koreans." I was bewildered at this point, but I awkwardly let it pass. He started talking about himself and how he dropped out of high school early because he had violent tendencies. He said he threw tables at his teachers and threatened kids. I let him talk, but inside started to feel extremely uncomfortable. I was constantly checking around the street, but found there wasn't a single person to be seen. He continued to ask me uncomfortable things like if I was a virgin, and how he liked to think about classical pieces in his mind while he had sex. I wish I was lying about that, but I'm not. At one point, he picked up a flower and tried to put it in my hair. I declined and pulled away from him. He told me that he liked flowers because he can preserve their beauty even after death. Now at this point, I'm shitting myself. My heart was pounding. I was terrified, but I didn't know how to tell him that I didn't want to go to this waterfall. It's been 20 minutes at this point, and no such place has been seen. I constantly asked him where the waterfall was, but he brushed it off, saying, "We're almost there." Eventually, after about 30 minutes of walking, we got to a random bush track. I'm beyond uncomfortable at this point, and my mind is racing for any excuse not to go in. I suddenly spotted a guy coming out of the bush track, and let me tell you, I couldn't have been more relieved to finally see another human being. I sent the guy a huge, pleading look, and he seemed perplexed. He glanced over at my guitar teacher, but didn't say anything and left. My heart sank. Now let me tell you, the guy actually wasn't lying about the waterfall. It really did exist. But who gives a shit at this point, right? I'm alone in a place I'm not familiar with a guy who is saying some really scary things. I let him walk ahead whilst behind my back I began texting my older sisters to call me ASAP. My phone rang, so I answered the call. My sister is on the line like, "What the fuck is going on? Are you still with that guy? Where are you?" I just faked a wobbly smile and answered, "Hey, what's up? What? You want me to come home right now? It's an emergency." Okay. Meanwhile, the guitar dude is watching me carefully. I told him I need to leave, and suddenly his facial expression changed. "Why?" he said in a low, intimidating way. His demeanor did a 180, no longer smiling. "Why do you have to do as your sister tells you?" His big, pale eyes were unblinking. I kept insisting that it was an emergency, but he was not budging one bit. He started demanding that the waterfall is literally right there, and we're so close. At this point, the bush track that we had walked was sloped downward. I was wearing a pair of boots at the time, but was constantly slipping as we ventured down. It had dawned on me that even if I were to run, it was most likely that I would either slip or he would catch up to me very easily. Inside, I'm freaking out like crazy because I honestly have no idea how to get back. So eventually I decide the best thing to do is just agree and get this over with. I weakly agree that we can go and see this godforsaken waterfall only for 5 minutes max, then I need to leave. He suddenly changed back to all cheery again, and he was leading me again down to the waterfall. By now I have thoughts that I might actually die here. If he were to harm me in any way, there would be no one to hear my cries. So when he wasn't looking, I started taking pictures of my surroundings. Random part of the bush track, some distinct rocks. Because my thoughts were, if I were to get murdered here, then maybe, just maybe, the police might find this phone and trace it to me. There are no words to truly express that feeling of, I am going to be murdered. If anything were to happen, would my family be able to find me? No one would ever suspect to look at a place like this. By this time, the sky was getting dark, and the guitar guy insisted on making a fire near the waterfall. I just agreed. He made a small fire, and we just sat in silence, staring at the flames for a bit. I heard a small sigh beside me, but continued to stare at the fire. After about the third sigh, I glanced over at him. He was staring straight at me with his huge, unblinking eyes, the flames making a disturbing shadow over his smiling face. He stayed like that for a solid 15 seconds. He began to scoot over closer and asked if he could give me a massage. I told him no. He then asked if I was cold and tried to cuddle me. So I stood up and said 5 minutes was up, and I needed to leave. He seemed satisfied that we did spend some time at the waterfall, so he agreed to take me home. The whole time back, he was constantly nudging me and asking me why I was so quiet. I was beyond too traumatized to answer. He forced his arm in mine, and we linked arms all the way home. It suddenly started to rain, and he just paused and forced me to face him. He asked me if he could kiss me. For once, I looked him straight in the eyes and said no. He seemed offended and asked why not. It's just a kiss. It doesn't mean anything. I told him no again, and he let it go. We're almost at my house, finally, before he stopped and said, "Well, this is yours." For a second I was confused, but realized he mistook my house for a couple blocks down. I just nodded and said goodbye to him. I walked in the driveway to the front door, waited until he was definitely gone, before I bolted out and all the way home. My sister answered the door, furious and demanding what the hell had happened and why I didn't answer her 50 missed calls. I didn't even have the energy to say anything. I just went upstairs to the bathroom, took a scathingly hot shower, and scrubbed my body clean 3 times. I know this story is extremely long, but trust me, this wasn't even all the creepy shit this guy said to me. He continued to send me messages and call me, but I ignored him. He began to grow angry and demanded for his book back. I eventually told one of my friends, who was mortified at what happened. She said to just ignore all his calls. I did have little comfort in the fact that he thought I lived a couple houses down, but was terrified every time the doorbell rang, as I pictured one of my family members answering it to find him at the door with a knife to kill us all. My friend had insisted on going to the cops, but what was the point? I was 18, and technically he didn't do anything illegal. After I blocked his number, that was the last I'd ever hear from him. It took me another 5 years to recover from the trauma, though never completely.
Earlier today, I think I might have seen something, but I don't know. This happened a few hours ago while I was outside mowing my lawn. Quick layout of my yard. When you walk down my driveway toward the street, if you look to the left, you'll see a dead end, and if you look to the right, you'll see a big tree that you couldn't see through. This is relevant. Now, on to what happened. I was mowing the lawn inside my fence, and when I finished that, I went over to the part of my yard that was outside of my fence. After I finished mowing, I looked to the right and saw a pair of legs on the other side of the tree. All I saw was legs, because I couldn't see the person through the trees. But their legs were all black. Like I couldn't make out any features. I couldn't see any pants or shoes. It was just all pitch black. I'm confused, and so I try walking around the tree to see who it was, but whatever it was ran away. It only took me 2 seconds to get to the other side, but as I said, whatever it was gone. I live on the corner of my block, so there's nowhere that a person could have hidden that fast. I've never believed in the paranormal or had any sort of experience, but I really can't explain what happened. Anyone who's had a similar experience and could possibly give me an explanation, I would appreciate it, because I'm still confused. My unit in the U.S. Army was deployed to Iraq in April of 2006. We were in Ramadi. It was 123 kilometers or 77 miles outside of Baghdad. I was in a Humvee headed to Baghdad for emergency leave due to a death in my family. It was close to midnight, and the Humvee I was in was with 3 others and a turret gunner. The 2 other Humvees had the same 5 total people, 1 in front, 1 in back. I was without a weapon due to my leave. The Humvee in front stopped hard. We all figured it was a possible IED or VBIED. The team leader in our HV radioed to the lead HV. The convo went along these lines. "What's up? Why did you stop?" "Something flew in front of the HV." "What? Flew in front of the HV?" "Yes. We didn't see anything." And then the third HV piped in, "Does anyone hear that helo?" HV1 replied, "Yes." HV2, our HV, "Yes, but I don't see it." Just then, in the desert off the highway, was a black figure. It looked like a huge bird. It was like smoke was emitting from it, like a blackish, greenish smoke with a bit of blue tinge. We all focused our eyes to the 2 troops with better night vision. They could see something but couldn't make out what it was, as the smoke was distorting the view. Within a second or two, a rock was thrown at one of the HVs. A big rock, like the size of someone's head. We all froze. Because of rules of engagement, we weren't allowed to just light it up. We used a spotlight, and in that light, something just flew straight up, and it was loud. And then we heard a loud screeching noise as well. Within a minute or two, it was over. We all sat there in a state of shock, curiosity, and panic. WTF was that? When we got to Baghdad, the translator that they were picking up to bring to the Marines that were with us said that it sounded like an ifrit. The team leader said, "What?" He explained to us that it was a winged jinn. We were all a bit speechless. We chose not to disclose to our command the winged thing, as battle fatigue, now known as PTSD, was a career killer at this juncture. It's been 13 years since this happened, and I met my now husband in 2015, and he had also been deployed to Ramadi with my sister unit at the time, and he had went through this particular stretch of highway on his mid-deployment leave. He recounted a similar story to me. It was enough to stop me in my tracks. It was pretty close to mine, except that they didn't stop, they just boogied on through. Considering the time we were there was very deadly, including an aid station manned by soldiers that was ambushed and blown to bits. I was a medic, so death was my norm. I still can't wrap my mind around it. And now, apparently, the last 2 places I lived in, something has followed us. So about 15 years ago, I was living with my ex-girlfriend, my sister, and her husband in an old house not far from town. Within the first few weeks of living there, strange things were happening regularly. Lights going out randomly, noises upstairs. At one point, one of the windows at the back of the house was cut. Like someone had went in with glass cutters trying to break in, but gave up on it and left. Creepy stuff like that. That was bad enough, but things got pretty severe as time went on.
One week in particular was truly insane. The first thing that happened that week was on a Tuesday night. Everyone was working, and I was home alone watching TV when I noticed that our cat was acting really weird, backed into a corner, and arched up as though she was scared. When I went to get up, the electricity went out in the house, and it was pitch black inside. The second that happened, I heard really loud footsteps running down the stairs toward me. I got up and braced myself for whatever it was, but there was nothing. I gathered myself and went outside to the front garden to check if the other houses' lights were on, but my house was the only one that was dark. I went to the fuse box to reset the trip switch, and all was back to normal. A few days later, I think it was a Tuesday, we were all sitting in the living room watching a movie and eating a pizza. The lights were on, there was a good atmosphere in the house, when out of nowhere, a massive bang happened upstairs. We go up to check it out, and I went into our bedroom and saw that my bedside table was in the middle of the room. But the worst and last thing that happened to me was on a Saturday night. I'll never forget this. It still gives me chills when I think about it. We go to bed, everything's normal. We watch a bit of a movie and fall asleep. I wake up facing the wall and glance at the alarm clock. It reads 3:13 a.m. I turned over to go back to sleep and saw my ex standing in the center of the room. Confused, I begin to sit up and ask her what's wrong. But as I start to sit up, I realize my ex is asleep in bed next to me. A surge of fear runs through my core, and I'm frozen to the spot. My eyes adjust, and I just barely make out the figure. It was a young girl in a nightdress with a cartoon character on it, soaking wet, with her head looking down at the floor. I could hear the water droplets landing on the carpet, and I'm just sitting there totally in shock, unable to believe my eyes. After a couple of seconds, her apparition melted away and faded out of sight. I got up and turned on the lights and tried to tell myself that it was just a night terror or something, but the problem with that was that there was a wet patch where she had been standing. We moved out shortly after that. But I can still picture her to this day. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. I bought an old antique Asian chest about 15 years ago. It was really lovely. I moved in with my parents while I was in college into the guest house out back. There was no room in the tiny cottage for the chest, so my mom had me put it in the walkway between the back of the house where my young brothers slept and the living room. Everyone, and I mean everyone, hated that piece of furniture. They'd scurry past it as fast as they could to get wherever they were going. Occasionally we would hear knocking or a random door that would just open. One morning, my brother Justin and I left and went to run errands and go shopping. When we came back 6 hours later, my mom was raking leaves in the front yard. When we got out of the car, Mom asked, "Wait, when did you come get Justin?" We told her that we had been gone all day. She said, "No, you haven't. I just saw him 2 hours ago. I assumed he'd gone to his bedroom to play video games." I told her that we had been gone since early that morning, and she kept insisting that there was no way. He walked past her. She had said hi to him. She said that he didn't respond to her, but she figured that he had been on a mission to get to his room. When I asked her where she saw him, she said that she was vacuuming in the hallway in front of the chest. I ended up giving it to my older brother, who said that he would hear my nieces laughing and playing in the hallway of his apartment. He said one morning he got up to see the youngest run down the hall into her room, but when he got to her room, she wasn't in there. He threw it out. I wish he hadn't, and I wish that I knew where it was now. This story happened around 4 years ago when I was 15 years old and we had just moved into this house. We live in a very small tourist town. School K through 12 in one building, population of 700, not during tourist season kind of small. There was this weird druggie that everyone knew and hated. He lived in one of his parents' houses and didn't pay rent, so they decided to kick him out. My parents were friends with the family and helped take care of his kids when he couldn't, so we were on pretty good terms. They gave the druggie, I'll just call him D for short, 30 days to move out for failing to pay a single rent check in his miserable life. We weren't doing very well at all financially and needed somewhere to stay or rent. We began talking to D's parents about the house, and they said we could begin renting to buy as soon as he moved out. The 30-day mark came around, and we asked D if he was ready, and he acted like he knew nothing about what we were talking about. His parents said they were just going to give him some extra days and help him move his stuff, so we waited another month. At this point, the current place we were staying in we had to move out of in a few days. We went to the house and went inside to see all of D's stuff still there. We decided we couldn't wait, and just bagged his stuff up and told him to pick it up. Fast forward about a year. We always heard scurrying, like mice and stuff in the ceiling. But we have a ton of strange animals like mice, snakes, lizards, chinchillas, etc. One of our 4 snakes went missing from its closed tank with the clips holding down the lid. There were no holes anywhere to be found. We didn't think anything of it, but it was a bit strange. Eventually we started hearing louder sounds, and our dad said it was just the house settling. Stuff was disappearing from the fridge, electrical bills went up, we smelt smoke, etc. Us kids got blamed for all of it, and got our phones taken, and my PC was taken away. But the power bill was still up. I also got blamed for smoking in the house, which my parents had no reason to believe or prompt this accusation, so I was grounded until graduation. I was mad now because I did not smoke in our house. I was unbelievably bored one day not being able to do anything, so I decided to explore our attic. I opened the door and screamed. My mom then came right up the ladder ready to beat me and saw it too. A bed, microwave, mini fridge, cigarettes, unsmoked blunt, etc. Guess who? It's D. He then came back that night, through my little sister's window. He was higher than I have ever seen a person be, and admitted to a bunch of stuff that we recorded. He took the snake and let it loose to get rid of the mice. He smoked in our house. He snuck in through my little sister's room every night. In court, he then admitted to making a small hole in the floor of the attic to watch my 11-year-old sister sleep. We changed all the locks, got a Ring doorbell, placed higher security locks on all the windows, and more. And the worst part of it all, the creep only got 6 months probation for marijuana possession, which wasn't yet legal in my state at the time. He got only 1 year of prison for breaking and entering for an entire year, almost every day. He did, however, have to pay a pretty heavy fine for damages and had to pay us back a year's worth of our electric bill. We are now out of debt, and my parents are living steadily because he finally finished paying all the fines to us. My sister has to go to a therapist twice a week and might never get a good night's sleep again. This probably isn't the scariest of stories, but it still worries me how badly things could have gone. It was the end of a long night, nearly 10 p.m., and all my friends had just caught the last train home. 13-year-old me was standing in Hamilton Central train station waiting on my mom to come and pick me up. The bus bay was near enough deserted, and there were very few people milling about. I wasn't particularly concerned about being alone at night. I did this every week after hanging out with my friends. I'd been standing there for about 15 minutes when an older, mid-30s, seemingly drunk man approached me asking for 50 pence for a bus. I told him I didn't have any money, and he wandered off to ask the other people around at the shop. He returned a few minutes later and stood beside me, occasionally looking me up and down. Despite my age, I was around 6 feet, and always looked about 16 or 17 and was pretty used to guys in their 20s hitting on me, but this guy was different. He wasn't saying anything. He was just leering at me, and alarm bells were going off left, right, and center in my brain. Just as I opened my mouth to ask him if he needed anything, he started babbling away, asking about how long it would take to walk to Glasgow, as he needed to get there before 10, or the police would put him back in jail. Instinctively, I asked him what he had been in jail for, and he gave me the biggest grin and starts telling me about how he had quote-unquote found someone fingering his bird, and so he messed him up. Long story short, he caught his girlfriend cheating on him and killed the guy. He continues like this for a few minutes, then starts moving closer to where I'm standing. I was nearly blacking out with fear, as I was completely defenseless if he were to decide to stab me or take me. Luckily, just as he got within my personal bubble, my mom pulled up, and I bolted to the car and made her drive home as fast as she could. When I was 16, I started dating this 20-year-old. It was a very bad relationship in which I was cheated on and treated like crap, but that's another story. Anyway, after my 17th birthday, I finally dumped him and got him to leave me alone. A couple months later, I was on Skype with one of my old friends around 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I hear tap, tap, tap on my window. Now, my bed is right next to, kind of underneath my window, and my bedroom is on the other side of the house from my parents. I asked my friend if he had heard anything, and he said no. A few seconds later, tap, 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 and he said yeah, that he had heard that. I agreed, ended the Skype call, and ran to my parents' room. I woke my mom up, and after telling her why I woke her up, she stopped being angry, and we tried to see if anyone was outside the house. No dice. So I slept in my parents' bed with them. At 17. The next day, my dad had apparently seen vague shoe prints outside my window. It happened twice more, and after the third time, my mom called the non-emergency police line and was suggested to put up a motion light and/or a security camera. We put up a motion light that day. I've yet to hear knocking on my window since the light was put up, and it's been 2.5 years. I'm about 95% certain that it's my psycho ex, because he would come to my window between 1 and 3 a.m. when we were together sometimes and knock. Also, one of my friends who had mutual friends with my ex said that my ex was in the area. He lived about 30 miles away from me, the nights when the knocking happened. So for my cheating asshole of an ex, let's not meet again.
I bought 3 small clown statues several years ago from a thrift store. They came in a box of about 100 other handmade clowns, and I picked out the cutest ones. Last year I moved into a new house and put the 3 clowns in a large display case in my living room along with the other trinkets. The case is completely inaccessible to the elements and is sealed by 2 panes of sliding glass. I got a horrible wave of fear one night a few months ago, and for no apparent reason my first instinct was to check the display case. To my shock, I noticed that one of the clowns had turned 180 degrees around in the case and had positioned itself to look away from the living room. The glass had remained shut, and nothing else was out of the ordinary. I turned it back to face the right way and forgot about it until I felt the same wave of fear about a month later.
Once again, I checked the case, and the same clown was turned the same 180 degrees around again. This has happened about 5 times now, and I'm starting to get really worried. I can't help but believe that it's a dark spirit or energy. I'm so freaked out. It's like the clown is trying to reach me, make me notice it, or perhaps get closer to the other objects in the case. I'm afraid to destroy it, move it, or touch it at all, because I don't want to absorb any energy or curse that it might contain. From as early as I can remember, I used to fall asleep watching old, reel-to-reel black and white cartoons on my wall, like Steamboat Willie. I clearly remember the jittery, shutter-like quality of the cartoon from the old reel-to-reel projector. There was no actual movie projector in my room. At night, I would wake up to someone tapping me on the shoulder. I had a usual routine that I followed when it happened, which involved burying myself under my covers and telling myself that I would count to 7 and then turn over to see what was there. Not sure if there's a significance to 7. To this day, I like to end things with 7. For example, I set my alarm at 6:27 and not 6:30. But anyhow, I would go through the counting routine multiple times. I wanted to see what was there, but I was a kid and didn't really want to see what was there. My mom would tell me that I just needed to confront it and tell it to leave me alone. It took years to build up that courage. I don't remember exactly how long, but I must have been in my early teens before I actually did get the nerve up to turn over right away and tell it to leave me alone and stop tapping me on the shoulder. Once I confronted it, it did stop. Then comes my baby sister when I was 15. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night quite often. Once she was old enough to talk, she said that she was scared of the hand that came up between her wall and the bed and tapped her on the shoulder at night. I'm in the Navy and I currently work on a base which encompasses an island called San Clemente Island. The island itself is mostly deserted and is untouched. But on the north side of the island is a town, for lack of better words, where the Navy and contractors live. One night I was headed down to relieve a coworker from watch. As I'm driving down the road, which is mostly pitch black, I see a figure in the street in my headlights. Naturally, I slam the brakes. I begin cussing up a storm because some idiot is walking in the middle of the road at night. Shortly after, however, I notice that it isn't a person, but more of a solid shadow. You could make out no features on it, but it had mass and was human-shaped. It was in the middle of the road and sort of stomping, almost like a weird dance. Then suddenly, it was just gone. It didn't fade away, didn't do anything dramatic, just disappeared. I freaked out and told a lot of my coworkers who didn't believe me. We never saw it again. I have heard some stories of people on the island having doors in their work areas open and stuff moving around on its own, but no stories anything similar to mine. I don't know much about the history of the island itself, but I do know at some point it was owned by Native Americans, and quite often remains of them are found or unearthed. My dad used to work at a homeless shelter. He usually helped them find jobs and things like that. When I had to go with him, they left me in a room with a bunch of Disney VHS movies with some printout coloring pages and a bunch of colored pencils. So, a lot of these people were drug addicts or recovering, that or schizophrenic. I was there because my dad left something there, but I wanted to go to my room, which the nice lady called the room. My dad was talking to this woman outside the door, which was closed. Then the door locks. All I could hear was screaming and crying outside. The knob shook, and I walked over to unlock the door, but my gut told me that if I did, it would not be good. So then a guy began to bang on the door, screaming for me and calling me baby girl. I didn't know what to do when I heard a very loud gunshot, followed by my dad screaming for them to stop shooting due to me being behind the door. He stabbed the woman who had used her keys to lock me in that room, and she did not make it. I was okay, but in the end I just remember a very nice cop opening the door and covering my eyes while they took me outside to an ambulance. R.I.P. Miss Rose, and thank you for saving my life. I am eternally grateful. Homeless man, let's not meet again.
Last night I was laying in bed trying to sleep. My room is already a nice, cool temperature due to my air conditioner. However, it feels as though out of nowhere the temperature drops 10 more degrees. I find this a bit strange, but I don't really mind it. Then suddenly, I feel what I think is a touch, like something is touching me around my neck and chest, as well as pressure building on those areas. I simply try not to ignore it and go to sleep. The cold and sensations of touch are a mere annoyance at this point, but that's when I saw it. I looked over my bed to the door, and there it was. A large, lanky shadow figure standing there with yellow eyes. It was only there for a second, but it still managed to scare me. Luckily, I was able to sleep, and as a precaution, I now have a bowl of salt in my room, as I hear it repels evil spirits and possibly demons.